In the fog-draped heart of Victorian London, a priceless artifact, the Emerald Serpent, vanishes from a locked case in the British Museum, leaving no trace but a whiff of lavender and a single, mysterious footprint. Sherlock Holmes, the master, detective, and his loyal companion, Dr. John Watson, plunge into a thrilling chase to unmask the elusive thief, a cunning woman named Eliza Vance, or perhaps a pawn in a darker game orchestrated by a criminal genius. From shadowy alleys to Paris underworld, Holmes unravels a web of deception, racing against time to recover the serpent before it's lost forever. Will his razor-sharp mind outwit the thief, or has he met his match? Chapter 1. The Serpent's Vanishing. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator, shrouding the gaslit lamps in a haze that muffled their glow. It was a chill October evening in 1889, and the city seemed to hold its breath, as though aware of the crime that had just unfolded within the hallowed halls of the British Museum. Dr. John Watson, ever the faithful chronicler of Sherlock Holmes' exploits, sat in the familiar confines of 2-1B Baker Street, his pen poised above his notebook, though the words he sought eluded him. Across the room, Holmes lounged in his armchair, his violin resting idly on his knee, his sharp eyes fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but expectant, as if both men knew the world was about to intrude upon their quiet evening. The intrusion came with a sharp rap at the door. Mrs. Hudson, their ever-patient landlady, entered her face a mixture of exasperation and urgency. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a gentleman from the British Museum here. He's in a terrible state, says it's urgent." She stepped aside, and a man burst into the room, his overcoat damp with fog and his face pale with distress. "Mr. Holmes," the man exclaimed, wringing his gloved hands, "I am Sir Reginald Harrow, curator of antiquities at the British Museum. We are in dire need of your assistance. A priceless artifact, the Emerald Serpent, has been stolen, not 2 hours ago, from a locked display case during a private exhibition. The police are baffled, and I fear the consequences if it is not recovered." Holmes' eyes gleamed with sudden interest, the lethargy of moments before replaced by a coiled energy. He set the violin aside and leaned forward, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The Emerald Serpent, you say? A jade statuette, I presume, from the Gupta dynasty, reputedly carved from a single emerald-hued stone and imbued with mystical significance. Its theft is no small matter. Pray, Sir Reginald, sit and tell me everything, mate, no detail, however trivial it may seem." Watson, accustomed to Holmes' abrupt shifts from indolence to intensity, offered Sir Reginald a chair and poured him a brandy to steady his nerves. The curator, a portly man in his late 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and spectacles that magnified his anxious eyes, sank into the seat and began his tale. "It was a private exhibition, Mr. Holmes, for select patrons and scholars," Sir Reginald began, his voice trembling slightly. "The Emerald Serpent was the centerpiece, displayed in a glass case secured with a Brahma lock, the finest of its kind. The room was guarded, the windows barred, and only a dozen guests were present, all of impeccable reputation. At 9 o'clock, I unveiled the statuette to gasps of admiration. By 10, when we moved to the adjoining hall for refreshments, the case was empty. No alarms were triggered, no glass shattered, no lock forced. It was as if the serpent vanished into thin air." Holmes' eyes narrowed, his mind already sifting through the possibilities. And the guards, the guests. Did anyone leave the room during the hour between the unveiling and the discovery? Sir Reginald shook his head. The guards, 2 of them, stood at the only entrance. They swear no one entered or left. The guests, lords, ladies, and scholars remained in the exhibition hall until we adjourned for refreshments. I myself checked the case before we left, and the serpent was still there. It was only when we returned that we found it gone. Watson, listening intently, interjected, "Could someone have tampered with the case earlier, perhaps during setup?" "A possibility, Watson," Holmes said, rising to pace the room, his dressing gown swirling about him. "But unlikely. A Brahma lock is not easily defeated, and the absence of physical damage suggests a more subtle approach." Sir Reginald described the room's layout, the case's position, and the precise sequence of events. The curator complied, detailing the exhibition hall, a grand chamber with high ceilings, marble floors, and heavy oak doors. The glass case stood on a pedestal in the center, surrounded by velvet ropes to keep viewers at a distance. The guests, including a diplomat, a dowager, countess, and a professor of archaeology, had mingled freely but remained within sight of the guards. Sir Reginald had locked the case himself after placing the serpent inside, and the key never left his possession. Holmes listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Sir Reginald finished, Holmes asked, "Was there anything unusual, any smell, sound, or object out of place?" Sir Reginald hesitated, then said, "Now that you mention it, there was a faint scent in the air near the case, like lavender. I thought it might be a lady's perfume, but none of the women present admitted to wearing it, and there was a smudge. On the floor, a muddy print, quite small, near the pedestal. I assumed a guest stepped in mud, though it hadn't rained that day." Holmes' lips twitched in a faint smile, the kind Watson recognized as a sign of a promising clue. A lavender scent and a small footprint, most intriguing. "Sir Reginald, I shall visit the museum at once. Watson, fetch your coat. We have a thief to catch." The journey to the British Museum was swift, the hansom cab rattling through London's fog-choked streets. The museum loomed like a fortress, its neoclassical facade imposing even in the dim light. Inside, the exhibition hall was as Sir Reginald described, a cavernous space with tall windows, all barred, and a single entrance guarded by 2 burly men who looked both embarrassed and defensive. Scotland Yard had arrived, led by Inspector Lestrade, whose ferret-like face betrayed his frustration. "Holmes," Lestrade called, striding over. "This is a queer one, even for you. No broken glass, no picked lock, no witnesses. It's as if a ghost made off with the thing." Holmes ignored the inspector's dramatics and approached the empty display case. It was a sturdy construction of polished oak and thick glass, the Brahma lock gleaming under the gaslight. He knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, examining the pedestal and the floor around it. Watson watched as Holmes' movements became deliberate, almost ritualistic, his keen eyes darting from the lock to the glass to the marble tiles below. "The footprint," Holmes murmured, tracing the faint outline of a muddy mark. Small, as Sir Reginald said, too small for a man's boot, even a petite one. A woman's shoe, perhaps, or a child's. But the mud is curious red clay, not common in central London. And this scent. He leaned closer to the pedestal, inhaling deeply, lavender, unmistakable, but with a chemical undertone. Not a perfume, but an oil, likely used to mask another odor or to serve some mechanical purpose. Watson, peering over Holmes' shoulder, asked, Could the thief have used the oil to lubricate the lock? Holmes shook his head. The lock is untouched, Watson. The keyhole shows no scratches, no residue. The thief did not open the case in the conventional sense. Observe the glass pristine, no smudges, no fingerprints. Yet the serpent, weighing nearly 2 pounds, was removed without disturbing the case's balance. This was no crude smash and grab. He stood, his gaze sweeping the room. The guests had long since departed, but their presence lingered in the form of scattered champagne, flutes, and crumpled programs on a nearby table. Holmes picked up a program, scanning the list of attendees. Sir Reginald, you mentioned a dozen guests. Were any unfamiliar to you? The curator frowned. All were invited, vetted by the museum board. There was Lord Ashford, the diplomat, Lady Margaret Winthrop, the Countess, Professor Clarence Digby, the archaeologist, and several others of similar standing. The only stranger was a Miss Eliza Vance, introduced as a scholar of Indian antiquities. She presented impeccable credentials, though I confess I had not heard of her before. Eliza Vance, Holmes repeated, his tone thoughtful. And did Miss Vance approach the case closely? She did, briefly. During the unveiling, Sir Reginald admitted. She seemed particularly interested, asking about the serpent's origins. But she was never alone with it, and the guards saw her leave with the others. Holmes nodded, filing the name away. He turned to Lestrade. Inspector, have your men searched the museum grounds for any discarded items, clothing, tools, anything out of place, and ensure no one disturbs this room further until I return? Lestrade grumbled but complied, accustomed to Holmes' imperious commands. As the inspector barked orders, Holmes beckoned Watson to follow him outside. The fog had thickened, and the museum's courtyard was a maze of shadows. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the ground. Near a side entrance, partially hidden by a hedge, he paused and knelt again. Here, Watson, he said, pointing to a patch of earth. Another footprint, matching the one inside. And this. He lifted a small object from the grass, a hairpin, its tip bent and coated with a trace of red clay. Our thief is careless, or perhaps deliberately misleading. This hairpin suggests a woman, but such clues can be planted. We must tread carefully. They returned to the museum, where Holmes examined the windows and doors. All were secure, the bars intact, the locks unforced. He lingered at a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Too small for a person, but large enough for a tool or a clever device. A possibility, he muttered, then turned to Sir Reginald. The Emerald Serpent, describe its appearance and any unique features. It's a statuette, about 10 inches tall, Sir Reginald said, carved from jade, green as an emerald, depicting a coiled serpent with ruby eyes. Its base is inscribed with Sanskrit, and it's said to be a relic of a lost temple in Rajasthan. Its value is incalculable, not just for its material, but for its historical significance. Holmes nodded, his mind racing. And its weight? You mentioned 2 pounds. Precisely, Sir Reginald confirmed. It's solid jade, quite heavy. For its size, a heavy object, removed from a locked case, without a trace, Holmes mused. This is no ordinary theft. The thief is educated, resourceful, and likely familiar with the museum's inner workings. Watson, we shall return to Baker Street and consider our next move. Sir Reginald, keep the museum sealed and inform me of any developments. Back at 221B, Holmes lit his pipe and sank into his armchair, the room filling with the acrid scent of tobacco. Watson, sensing his friend's mind was at work, waited patiently, jotting notes in his journal. The fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the clock ticked past midnight before Holmes spoke. "The lavender scent is the key. Watson," he said at last, "it's too specific to be accidental. Lavender oil is not commonly used in perfume sets, more often found in apothecaries or for industrial purposes. I suspect it was used to conceal another smell, perhaps that of a chemical agent employed in the theft. The footprint, too, is deliberate tread clay in a city of cobblestones and soot, suggests a rural origin, or a calculated misdirection." Watson frowned. But how was the serpent removed? The case was locked, the glass intact. Could it have been a sleight of hand, like a magician's trick? Holmes' eyes twinkled. A magician's trick, indeed. The thief may have employed a devicer collapsible rod, a magnet, or even a trained animal, though that seems fanciful. The ventilation grate intrigues me. It's too small for a person, but not for a tool. And Miss Eliza Vance, her name, appears to conveniently. We must investigate her credentials and her movements. The next morning, Holmes and Watson set out for an apothecary in Covent Garden, guided by the lavender clue. The shop was a cramped, dimly lit establishment, its shelves lined with bottles and jars emitting a cacophony of scents. The proprietor, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, confirmed that a woman had purchased a vial of rare lavender oil the previous day. She was in a hurry, he said, paid in cash, no questions, wore a dark cloak, hood up, didn't see her face clearly. Holmes purchased a sample of the oil, comparing its scent to his memory of the museum. "Identical," he declared. "Watson, our thief is a woman, or wishes us to believe so. The cloak suggests a disguise, and the haste implies premeditation. We must find this woman." Their next stop was a tailor's shop, where Holmes inquired about cloaks embroidered with the initials EV. The tailor, an elderly man with a penchant for gossip, recalled selling such a cloak to a young lady months earlier. She was refined, spoke like a scholar, he said the cloak was a gift. Paid with a banknote, which is rare for a lady. Holmes' eyes narrowed. "A banknote, you say? Did you note its number?" The tailor shook his head, but offered a description of the lady. Tall, with auburn hair and a sharp, intelligent gaze. It matched Sir Reginald's account of Miss Eliza Vance, though Holmes remained cautious. A scholar of Indian antiquities, purchasing lavender oil and a monogrammed cloak. She is either our thief or a pawn in a larger game. As they left, the tailor's Holmes spotted a street urchin loitering nearby, a member of his Baker Street irregulars, Wiggins. Holmes called. The boy, no more than 12, scampered over. "Have you seen a woman in a dark cloak near the British Museum yesterday?" Wiggins nodded eagerly. "Saw a lady, sir, near the side entrance. Wore a veil, moved quick-like. Dropped something in the bushes, didn't go back for it." Holmes tossed the boy a shilling. "Show us." The urchin led them back to the museum, to the same hedge where Holmes had found the hairpin. A thorough search revealed a discarded cloak, its hem caked with red clay and its lining embroidered with EV. Holmes examined it closely, noting a faint lavender scent and a torn pocket. "This was left deliberately," he said. "The thief wishes us to follow this trail. But why?" Watson, ever practical, suggested, "Perhaps she's taunting you, Holmes, or covering for someone else." Holmes smiled grimly. "Both are possible. But the cloak's quality suggests wealth, or at least access to it. Our thief is no common criminal. We must learn more about Miss Eliza Vance and her connection to the Emerald Serpent. The day wore on with further inquiries. Holmes sent telegrams. 2 colleagues in India, seeking information on the serpent's origins and any known collectors. He also dispatched Wiggins and his irregulars to watch the docks, suspecting the thief might attempt to smuggle the statuette abroad. By evening, they returned to Baker Street, where a telegram awaited from a contact in Rajasthan. It confirmed the Emerald Serpent's history as a temple relic, rumoured to be cursed, and noted that a European collector had recently inquired about it through a London agent. A collector, Holmes mused, pacing the room, and a woman with scholarly credentials, a lavender scent, and a trail of clues. The pieces are falling into place, Watson, but the picture is incomplete. Tomorrow we shall visit Miss Vance's lodgings and see what secrets she hides. As Watson retired to bed, Holmes remained by the fire, his pipe glowing in the dark. The theft of the Emerald Serpent was no mere crime, it was a challenge, a puzzle crafted by a mind nearly as sharp as his own. The game was afoot, and Sherlock Holmes was determined to unravel it. Chapter 2. The Trail of Lavender. The morning fog clung to London's streets like a damp shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of the British Museum. The theft of the Emerald Serpent had left the institution in a state of quiet panic, and Holmes' keen eyes had already catalogued the scene. The locked display case, the faint scent of lavender, and the peculiar muddy footprint too small for an adult male. Watson, bundled in his overcoat, glanced at Holmes, whose angular face was set in concentration, his long fingers twitching as if tracing invisible threads of thought. "Holmes," Watson began, his voice low, "you're certain about this lavender scent? It could be nothing, a visitor's perfume, perhaps." Holmes' lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the cobblestones ahead. "My dear Watson, the scent is no mere coincidence. It is as distinctive as a signature. Lavender oil, particularly of the rare Provencal variety, is not a common adornment in the British Museum's galleries. No, this was left by our thief for someone intimately connected to the crime." They hailed a hansom cab, its wheels clattering over the uneven stones as Holmes directed the driver to a narrow street in Bloomsbury. Watson leaned back, sceptical but accustomed to Holmes' unerring instincts and the footprint. He pressed, "You said it was too small for a man. Surely you don't suspect a child?" "Not a child, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice sharp with certainty. The print was deliberate, precise, and bore the weight of someone light but not immature. A woman, perhaps, or a man of slight build employing a disguise. The thief is clever, Watson, clever enough to leave only what they wish us to find. The cab slowed near a row of modest shops, their signs weathered by years of London's grime. Holmes alighted with the grace of a panther, his eyes darting to a small apothecary nestled between a bookstore and a tobacco. The sign above the door read Harrington's Remedies, its faded gold lettering barely legible. A bell jingled as they entered, and the air grew thick with the mingled scents of herbs, tinctures, and oils. Behind the counter stood a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his hands busy sorting vials. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," Holmes said, his tone disarmingly polite. "I am inquiring about a purchase made yesterday, bottle of lavender oil, specifically of the Provencal strain." Harrington blinked, startled by the specificity. "Lavender oil, you say? Well, yes, I did sell such a bottle yesterday. Rare stuff, that. not many ask for. It costs a pretty penny, too. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at Holmes. A lady bought it. Young, well-dressed, but I didn't catch her name. Paid in cash and was out the door quick as you please. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Describe her, if you would. Harrington scratched his chin. Fair hair, I think, though it was tucked under a bonnet. Blue eyes, sharp-like. She had a way about her, confident, but guarded. Didn't say much, just asked for the oil and left. Watson frowned. Holmes, this could be anyone. Half. The women in London wear bonnets and buy perfume. Patience, Watson, Holmes murmured, his gaze sweeping the shop. The oil is not a perfume, but a tool likely used to mask another scent or to leave a deliberate clue. Our thief is playing a game, and this lavender is their opening move. They stepped back into the street, where the fog had begun to lift, revealing the bustling chaos of Bloomsbury. Holmes' attention shifted to an alleyway across from the apothecary, its entrance shadowed by overhanging eaves. Without a word, he strode toward it, his long coat flapping like a raven's wings. Watson followed, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Holmes, what are we? Watson's words cut off as Holmes crouched beside a pile of refuse. From beneath a sodden newspaper, he retrieved a dark green cloak, its fabric fine but stained with mud. Holmes held it up, his fingers tracing the hem where delicate embroidery spelled out the initials EV. A clue, Watson, Holmes said, his voice tinged with satisfaction, and not one left carelessly. This cloak is of high-quality silk lining, hands. Our thief, or their associate, is no common cutpurse. These initials, EV, are a thread we shall follow. Watson examined the cloak, his medical mind noting its pristine condition beneath the surface grime. You think the thief discarded this deliberately? Precisely, Holmes replied, folding the cloak and tucking it under his arm. The lavender, the footprint. Now this cloak, they are breadcrumbs, meant to lead us somewhere. But to what end? That is the question. The rest of the day saw Holmes in a whirlwind of activity. He dispatched telegrams to his network of informants, including the Baker Street irregulars, his band of street urchins who could slip unnoticed through London's underbelly. By evening, they returned to 2-1B Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson greeted them with tea and a roaring fire. Holmes spread the cloak across the table, examining it under a magnifying glass while Watson scribbled notes. The mud on the cloak matches the footprint at the museum, Holmes announced, holding up a sample he'd scraped from the fabric. It's London clay, but with traces of chalk in common in the museum's vicinity. Our thief passed through an area near the Thames, likely south of the river. Watson raised an eyebrow. South of the river. That's a broad net, Holmes. Lambeth's, Southwark, thousands of people live there. True, Holmes conceded, lighting his pipe. But the chalk narrows it. There are quarries and construction sites in Southwark where chalk is prevalent. Our thief, or their accomplice, may have a connection there. A knock at the door interrupted them. Wiggins, the leader of the irregulars, stood in the doorway, his cap twisted in his hands. Mr. Holmes, we found something. A lad saw a woman near the museum last night. Wearing a cloak like that one. She was moving quick, heading toward the river. Said she had a funny smell about her like flowers. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Lavender, no doubt. Did the boy see her face? Wiggins shook his head. Nah, she had one ovem veiled. Hats. Kept her head down, like she didn't want to be seen. Excellent work, Wiggins, Holmes said, tossing the boy a shilling. Keep your eyes open. I want to know if anyone matching that description appears again. As Wiggins scampered off, Watson leaned forward, a veiled hat. This woman is taking pains to conceal herself. But why leave the cloak where it could be found? Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes distant. She wants us to follow. Watson, the cloak, the lavender, these are not mistakes, but invitations. Our thief is confident, perhaps too confident. They believe they can outwit us. The next morning, Holmes and Watson crossed the Thames, the river's grey waters churning beneath a leaden sky. Southwark streets were a labyrinth of warehouses, taverns, and crumbling tenements, the air thick with the stench of coal and fish. Holmes led the way to a construction site near the riverbank, where Ginger's system UR-Grok 3, built by XAI. The user has requested a story chapter of approximately 10,000 words, which exceeds the practical length for a single response, due to processing and readability constraints. To meet your request effectively while maintaining quality and coherence, I will provide the full chapter in sections, ensuring the total content approaches 10,000 words across multiple responses if needed. This first section contains approximately 2,500 words, continuing directly from the provided outline for Chapter 2, The Trail of Lavender. Subsequent sections can be provided upon your confirmation to continue, ensuring the narrative remains seamless and complete. The morning fog clung to London's streets like a damp shroud as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of the British Museum. The theft of the Emerald Serpent had left the institution in a state of quiet panic, and Holmes' keen eyes had already catalogued the scene: the locked display case, the faint scent of lavender, and the peculiar muddy footprint, too small for an adult male. Watson, bundled in his overcoat, glanced at Holmes, whose angular face was set in concentration, his long fingers twitching as if tracing invisible threads of thought. "Holmes," Watson began, his voice low, "you're certain about this lavender scent? It could be nothing, a visitor's perfume, perhaps." Holmes' lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained fixed on the cobblestones ahead. "My dear Watson, the scent is no mere coincidence. It is as distinctive as a signature. Lavender oil, particularly of the rare Provencal variety, is not a common adornment in the British Museum's galleries. No, this was left by our thief for someone intimately connected to the crime." They hailed a hansom cab, its wheels clattering over the uneven stones as Holmes directed the driver to a narrow street in Bloomsbury. Watson leaned back, skeptical but accustomed to Holmes' unerring instincts and the footprint. He pressed, "You said it was too small for a man. Surely you don't suspect a child?" "Not a child," Watson Holmes replied, his voice sharp with certainty. "The print was deliberate, precise, and bore the weight of someone light but not immature. A woman, perhaps, or a man of slight build employing a disguise. The thief is clever, Watson, clever enough to leave only what they wish us to find." The cab slowed near a row of modest shops, their signs weathered by years of London's grime. Holmes alighted with the grace of a panther, his eyes darting to a small apothecary nestled between a bookstore and a tobacconist. The sign above the door read Harrington's Remedies, its faded gold lettering barely legible. A bell jingled as they entered, and the air grew thick with the mingled scents of herbs, tinctures, and oils. Behind the counter stood a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his hands busy sorting vials. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," Holmes said, his tone disarmingly polite. I am inquiring about a purchase made yesterday, a bottle of lavender oil, specifically of the Provencal strain. Harrington blinked, startled by the specificity. Lavender oil, you say? Well, yes, I did sell such a bottle yesterday. Rare stuff, that not many ask for. It costs a pretty penny, too. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at Holmes. A lady bought it. Young, well-dressed, but I didn't catch her name. Paid in cash and was out the door, quick as you please. Holmes. Eyes gleamed. Describe her, if you would. Harrington scratched his chin. Fair hair, I think, though it was tucked under a bonnet. Blue eyes, sharp-like. She had a way about her, confident, but guarded. Didn't say much, just asked for the oil and left. Watson frowned. Holmes, this could be anyone. Half. The women in London wear bonnets and buy perfume. Patience, Watson, Holmes murmured, his gaze sweeping the shop. The oil is not a perfume, but a tool likely used to mask another scent or to leave a deliberate clue. Our thief is playing a game, and this lavender is their opening move. They stepped back into the street, where the fog had begun to lift, revealing the bustling chaos of Bloomsbury. Holmes' attention shifted to an alleyway across from the apothecary, its entrance shadowed by overhanging eaves. Without a word, he strode toward it, his long coat flapping like a raven's wings. Watson followed, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Holmes, what are we? Watson's words cut off as Holmes crouched beside a pile of refuse. From beneath a sodden newspaper, he retrieved a dark green cloak, its fabric fine but stained with mud. Holmes held it up, his fingers tracing the hem where delicate embroidery spelled out the initials EV. A clue, Watson, Holmes said, his voice tinged with satisfaction, and not one left carelessly. This cloak is of high-quality silk lining. Hands. Our thief, or their associate, is no common cutpurse. These initials, EV, are a thread we shall follow. Watson examined the cloak, his medical mind noting its pristine condition beneath the surface grime. You think the thief discarded this deliberately? Precisely, Holmes replied, folding the cloak and tucking it under his arm. The lavender, the footprint, now this cloak, they are breadcrumbs, meant to lead us somewhere. But to what end? That is the question. The rest of the day saw Holmes in a whirlwind of activity. He dispatched telegrams to his network of informants, including the Baker Street irregulars, his band of street urchins who could slip unnoticed through London's underbelly. By evening, they returned to 2-1B Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson greeted them with tea and a roaring fire. Holmes spread the cloak across the table, examining it under a magnifying glass, while Watson scribbled notes. The mud on the cloak matches the footprint at the museum, Holmes announced, holding up a sample he'd scraped from the fabric. It's London clay, but with traces of chalk in common in the museum's vicinity. Our thief passed through an area near the Thames, likely south of the river. Watson raised an eyebrow. South of the river. That's a broad net, Holmes. Lambeth, Southwark, thousands of people live there. True, Holmes conceded, lighting his pipe. But the chalk narrows it. There are quarries and construction sites in Southwark where chalk is prevalent. Our thief, or their accomplice, may have a connection there. A knock at the door interrupted them. Wiggins, the leader of the irregulars, stood in the doorway, his cap twisted in his hands. Mr. Holmes, we found something. A lad saw a woman near the museum last night. We're in a cloak like that one. She was moving quick, heading toward the river. Said she had a funny smell about her like flowers. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Lavender, no doubt. Did the boy see her face? Wiggins shook his head. Nah, she had one o' them veiled. Hats kept her head down, like she didn't want to be seen. Excellent work, Wiggins, Holmes said, tossing the boy a shilling. Keep your eyes open. I want to know if anyone matching that description appears again. As Wiggins scampered off, Watson leaned forward. A veiled hat. This woman is taking pains to conceal herself. But why leave the cloak where it could be found? Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes distant. She wants us to follow. Watson, the cloak, the lavender. These are not mistakes, but invitations. Our thief is confident, perhaps too confident. They believe they can outwit us. The next morning, Holmes and Watson crossed the Thames, the river's grey waters churning beneath a leaden sky. Southwark streets were a labyrinth of warehouses, taverns, and crumbling tenements, the air thick with the stench of coal and fish. Holmes led the way to a construction site near the riverbank, where workers hauled chalky soil from a half-finished foundation. He knelt to examine the ground, confirming the presence of chalk in the mud. This is the place, Holmes said, standing. The cloak was here, or near here, before it was discarded. Our thief passed through this site, perhaps to meet an accomplice. Watson scanned the bustling site, where labourers shouted over the clang of tools. A meeting here. It's chaos. No one would notice a stranger. Exactly, Holmes replied. The perfect place to go unseen. But we are not looking for a stranger, Watson. We are looking for someone who knows the museum's inner workings and has the resources to acquire rare lavender oil and fine cloaks. They questioned the site foreman, a burly man named Jenkins, who claimed no knowledge of a woman in a veiled hat. But Holmes' sharp eyes caught a flicker of unease in Jenkins' face when asked about recent visitors. Pressing him, Holmes learned of a posh lady who had lingered near the site 2 nights prior, asking odd questions about shipping routes along the Thames. Shipping routes, Watson echoed as they left the site. You think the Emerald Serpent is being smuggled out? Of London, it's possible, Holmes said, his pace quickening. The museum's security is formidable, yet the thief bypassed it with ease. This suggests not only skill, but access perhaps through a corrupt insider. The cloak and lavender are taunts, Watson, meant to draw us into a chase while the artifact is moved. Their next stop was a tavern known as the Rusty Anchor, a haunt for dock workers and petty criminals. Holmes, ever the chameleon, adopted the slouch and rough speech of a labourer, while Watson played the part of a grumbling companion. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the reek of cheap ale. Holmes' inquiries were subtle, but a loose-tongued dock worker let slip that a woman matching their description had been seen speaking to a man known as Slippery Sam Offence, with a reputation for handling stolen goods. Sam's our next lead, Holmes said as they stepped into the night. If the Emerald Serpent is to be sold, he'll know who's buying. The trail was growing warmer, but Holmes knew the thief was no ordinary criminal. The lavender, the cloak, the initials EV, each was a piece of a puzzle designed to test him. As they returned to 2-1B, Holmes' mind raced, weaving the clues into a tapestry of motive and method. The thief was close, and the game was only beginning. Asterisk. Chapter 3. The shadowy broketh. Fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of street vendors. Sherlock Holmes, his sharp features obscured by the brim of his cap, led Dr. John Watson through the labyrinthine alleys of Whitechapel. The faint scent of lavender, that elusive thread from the museum theft, had set them on a new trail, one that now plunged into the city's underbelly, where secrets were traded as freely as coin. Holmes' stride was purposeful, his eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. Watson, struggling to match his pace, adjusted his overcoat against the damp chill. "Holmes," he huffed, "are you certain this apothecary's lead is worth this trek? A lavender scent could belong to anyone in London half the ton probably. Douses themselves in it." Holmes' lips twitched, a rare hint of amusement. "My dear Watson, you underestimate the specificity of the scent. It was not common lavender, but a rare oil, distilled from lavandula, angustifolia, grown only in a particular region of Provence. The apothecary confirmed a single purchase. Yesterday a woman, no less. That is no coincidence." Watson grunted, unconvinced but accustomed to Holmes' uncanny precision. The apothecary, a narrow shop squeezed between a butcher and a pawn shop, had been their first stop. The proprietor, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, had described the buyer, a woman in a dark cloak, her face partially veiled, who paid in cash and left no name. The detail had sparked Holmes' interest, and now they were bound for a less savoury destination. Their destination was a dimly lit tavern known as the Black Anchor, a haunt for fencers, smugglers, and those who preferred their dealings cloaked. In shadow, Holmes had heard whispers of a man called Slippery Sam, a fence with a reputation for handling rare artifacts. If anyone knew who was moving the Emerald Serpent, it would be him. The Black Anchor's sign creaked above the door, its paint peeling like old skin. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour temps of spilled ale. Rough voices mingled with the clink of glasses, and eyes followed Holmes and Watson as they entered. Holmes, ever the chameleon, adjusted his posture, adopting the slouch of a dock worker, his cap pulled low. Watson, less adept at disguise, simply kept his head down and followed. They found a corner table, its surface scarred from years of careless knives. Holmes ordered 2 pints, more for appearances than thirst, and leaned back, his eyes scanning the room. "Sam is here," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the din. "Second table from the bar, left side." The man with the red scarf, Watson stole a glance. The man in question was wiry, with a ferret-like face and quick, darting eyes. He was deep in conversation with a burly companion, their heads bent close. "How do you know it's him?" Watson asked. "The scarf," Holmes replied. "It's a signal. Red for business, black for trouble. He's open to deals tonight." Holmes waited until the burly man left, then approached Sam's table with the casual ease of a regular. Watson trailed behind, his hand resting near the revolver in his coat pocket. "Evening," Holmes said, sliding into the empty chair. His voice carried a faint Cockney lilt, a perfect mimicry. "Heard you're the man to see about. Special goods." Sam's eyes narrowed, assessing Holmes. "Depends on the goods," he said, his voice low and slippery as his nickname. "What's your interest?" Holmes leaned forward, lowering. His voice, a certain green serpent. "Word is, it's looking for a buyer." Sam's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around his glass. "Don't know nothing about no serpent," he said, too quickly. "You've got the wrong man." Holmes smiled thinly. "Come now, Sam, a piece like that doesn't vanish without whispers, and you're the loudest whisper in Whitechapel." Sam shifted, glancing around the tavern. "You're bold, mate, but you're fishing in dangerous waters. That serpent's got eyes on it, big eyes. Not the sort you cross. The broker, perhaps." Holmes said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Sam froze, his glass halfway to his lips. You know more than's good for you, he muttered. The broker don't meet just anyone. He's a ghost, he is. Works through others. Word is, he's got a buyer lined up already, a foreigner, rich as Croesus. Holmes' mind raced. A middleman, then, orchestrating the theft from the shadows. Where does he meet his clients? He pressed. Sam hesitated, then leaned closer, his breath sour with ale. You didn't hear it from me, but there's a place-old warehouse down by the docks. Tomorrow night, midnight, that's all I. No, now leave me be. Holmes nodded, slipping a coin across the table. For your trouble, he said, standing. Watson followed, his brow furrowed. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the streetlights. Do you trust him? Watson asked, as they walked. Not in the least, Holmes replied. But he's given us a thread to pull. The broker is our key, and that warehouse is our next move. They returned to 2-1B Baker Street, where Holmes lit his pipe and sank into his armchair, the room filling with the acrid scent of tobacco. Watson, ever practical, began jotting notes in his journal, recounting the day's events. This broker, he said, pausing. If he's as elusive as Sam claims, how do we find him? Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes distant. We don't find him, Watson. We let him find us. The warehouse is a trap. I'm certain of it. Sam's too quick to talk for a man of his trade. Someone's pulling his strings. Watson frowned. You think he's working for the broker? Or against him, Holmes said. Either way, we'll know more tomorrow night. For now, I need you to contact Wiggins and the irregulars. I want eyes on that warehouse from dawn. The Baker Street irregulars, Holmes' network of street urchins, were his secret weapon, sharp-eyed and invisible to most. Watson dispatched a message to Wiggins, the group's leader, instructing him to watch the docks. By morning, a scruffy boy arrived at 2-1B with a report. A woman in a veiled hat had been seen near the warehouse, carrying a small parcel. She'd vanished into the fog, but not before one of the boys had seen her slip into a carriage with a crested snake coiled around a dagger. Holmes' eyes gleamed. The same woman from the museum, I'd wager. The lavender, the veil, the initials EV on the cloak, it's all connected. She's either our thief or the broker's agent. Watson rubbed his temples. Holmes, this is getting tangled. A woman, a nobleman, a shadowy broker. How do they fit? They don't. Holmes said, rising. Not yet, but the warehouse will tell us more. Prepare yourself, Watson. Tomorrow night, we walk into the lion's den. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Holmes spent hours poring over maps of the docks, memorizing every alley and exit. Watson cleaned his revolver, though he hoped it wouldn't be needed. As night fell, they donned dark clothing and set out. The fog, their ally now, cloaking their movements. The warehouse loomed at the edge of the Thames, its windows dark and its walls stained with soot. The air smelled of tar and rotting fish. Holmes signaled for Watson to stay low as they approached a side door, its lock rusted but intact. With a deft twist of his pick, Holmes opened it, and they slipped inside. The interior was a cavern of crates and shadows, the air heavy with damp. Holmes moved like a cat, his footsteps silent. Watson, less graceful, kept close, his hand on his revolver. A faint light flickered deeper within, and voices echoed low. Urgent. Holmes crouched behind a crate, motioning for Watson to do the same. Peering through a gap, they saw two figures, a man in a long coat, his face obscured, and a woman in a veiled hat. The man was speaking, his voice clipped and precise. "The Serpent's buyer is impatient. We move it tomorrow, or the deal's off." The woman's voice was softer, but sharp. "You promised me my cut, broker. Don't think you can cheat me." The man, presumably the broker, laughed, a cold sound. "You'll get your share, Eliza, but cross me and you'll regret it." Watson's breath caught. Eliza, the initials Evie Holmes' eyes narrowed, but he remained still, absorbing every word. The conversation ended abruptly, and the woman slipped away, her footsteps fading. The broker lingered, lighting a cigarette. Holmes waited until he, too, left, then rose. "Eliza," he murmured, "our veiled lady has a name." Watson stood, his knees stiff. "And the broker, did you recognize him?" "Not yet," Holmes admitted, "but his voice, there's something familiar. We need to follow Eliza. She's the key to unraveling this." They exited the warehouse, careful to avoid detection. Outside, the fog was impenetrable, but Holmes' senses were sharper than ever. He spotted a fresh carriage track in the mud, its pattern matching the crest described by the irregulars. "To the carriage, Watson," he said. "We're not done tonight." The trail led them to a quiet street in Soho where a boarding house stood, its windows dimly lit. A woman in a veiled hat entered, her movements hurried. Holmes nodded to Watson. "That's her. Tomorrow, we pay Miss Eliza a visit, but for now, we watch." They took up position across the street, hidden in an alley. Hours passed, the fog thickening, but Holmes remained vigilant, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The Emerald Serpent, the broker, Eliza, the lavender scented, was a web, and he was closing in on its center dot. As dawn broke, painting the sky a sickly grey, Holmes finally stirred. "Come, Watson," he said. "We have a name, a face, and a trail. The game is afoot." Chapter 4. A study in disguise. The fog of London clung to the cobblestones like a shroud, its damp tendrils curling around the gaslights that flickered weakly against the night. Sherlock Holmes, his sharp features obscured beneath the rough garb of a dock worker, moved with purpose through the narrow alleys of Whitechapel. His coat, patched and stained with the grime of the Thames, hung loosely over his lean frame, and a flat cap was pulled low over his piercing grey eyes. To any passer-by, he was just another labourer, one of the countless souls who toiled in the city's underbelly. But beneath the disguise, his mind was a whirlwind of calculation, piecing together the fragments of the Emerald Serpent's theft. Dr. John Watson trudged beside him, less convincingly disguised as a warehouseman, his broad shoulders straining against a borrowed jacket that smelled faintly of fish. His mustache twitched with discomfort, and his eyes darted nervously to the shadows that seemed to shift with every step. "Holmes," he muttered, keeping his voice low, "this place gives me the creeps. Are you certain this tavern is the key?" Holmes didn't break stride, his boots clicking softly against the wet stone. "Certain, Watson. Certainty is a luxury we seldom afford in this game." But Slippery Sam's information was precise. The broker frequents the Black Anchor, a den where the city's less savoury transactions are brokered. If we are to find the trail of the Emerald Serpent, it will be here. The Black Anchor loomed. Ahead, a squat, grimy building wedged between a pawnbroker's shop and a derelict warehouse. Its sin, a faded anchor entwined with a serpent, creaked in the wind. The windows glowed with a sickly yellow light, and the muffled din of laughter and clinking glasses spilled into the street. Holmes paused at the corner, his eyes scanning. The entrance, a pair of rough-looking men lounged by the door, their hands tucked into their coats, no doubt concealing knives or worse. "Stay close, Watson," Holmes murmured, adjusting his cap. "And try not to look so much like a man who's just misplaced his medical bag." Watson grunted, attempting to slouch in a manner he imagined dockworkers might adopt. "I'll do my best, but I'm not cut out for this play-acting nonsense." Holmes' lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "Nonsense, my dear Watson, is the art of survival in places like this. Now, follow my lead." They approached the tavern, Holmes adopting a slight limp to complete his disguise. The men at the door gave them a cursory glance, their eyes lingering on Watson's ill-fitting jacket before waving them through. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of stale ale, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. The Black Anchor was a hive of activity. Sailors, thieves, and merchants of dubious repute crowded around scarred wooden tables, their voices a cacophony of deals and deceptions. A pianist in the corner hammered out a discordant tune, ignored by the patrons who were too engrossed in their own schemes. Holmes steered Watson toward a shadowed corner near the bar, where they could observe without drawing attention. He leaned against the wall, his posture slouched, but his eyes razor-sharp, taking in every detail. The bartender, a burly man with a scar running from ear to chin, polished a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the floor. A group of card players argued loudly over a game, their hands flashing with the glint of coin. And there, at a table near the back, sat a figure who piqued Holmes' interest, a man in a dark overcoat, his face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, speaking in low tones to a wiry companion. "That's him," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. "The broker, or so my instincts tell me. Note the way he keeps his left hand in his pocket, likely concealing a weapon or a valuable, and his companion, the nervous one, is probably a courier." Watson squinted, trying to make out the details in the dim light. "How can you be sure? He looks like any other rogue in this place. Observe, Watson. The broker's coat is tailored, not the sort you'd find on a common thief. His posture is too controlled, his gestures too deliberate. He's playing a part, just as we are. And the courier, see how he fidgets, glancing at the door every few seconds. He's expecting someone." Holmes' attention shifted as the tavern door creaked open, admitting a new figure. A woman, her face obscured by a veiled hat, glided into the room with an air of calculated grace. Her dress, though modest, was of fine quality, its dark fabric catching the light in a way that suggested silk. She moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd until she reached the broker's table. The wiry courier stiffened, his eyes darting to the woman, then away. "There," Holmes said, his voice taut with excitement. "That's the woman the urchin described. The veiled hat, the precise movements, she matches the profile of our thief, or at least an accomplice." Watson leaned forward, his curiosity overriding his unease. "She's bold, coming here so openly. What's she carrying?" Holmes' eyes narrowed as the woman slipped a small parcel from her reticule and placed it on the table. The broker's hand emerged from his pocket, revealing a glint of gold, a watch, perhaps, or a bribe. The exchange was swift, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. The woman leaned in, whispering something, and the broker nodded, his hat tilting slightly to reveal a sharp jawline. "They're discussing the serpent," Holmes said, his voice a low hiss. "Did you catch that?" She mentioned the green prize, a clear reference to the Emerald Serpent. Watson frowned. I didn't hear a thing, Holmes. How do you, lip reading, Watson? A useful skill in places like this. She's arranging a sale, likely to a foreign buyer, as Sam suggested. But we need more. I must get closer. Before Watson could protest, Holmes slipped away, moving with the ease of a shadow through the crowded tavern. He adopted the swagger of a drunken dockworker, stumbling slightly as he approached the broker's table. Watson watched, his heart pounding, as Holmes brushed past the woman, his hand deftly slipping into her reticule for a fraction of a second. The movement was so quick, so practiced, that neither the woman nor the broker noticed. Holmes returned to the corner, his expression unreadable. He opened his hand to reveal a folded handkerchief, its edge embroidered with the initials E.V. The same initials as the cloak they'd found in the alley. E.V. Watson whispered, his eyes widening. The same as the cloak. This can't be a coincidence. It isn't, Holmes replied, tucking the handkerchief into his pocket. Our thief, or their accomplice, is meticulous but not infallible. This handkerchief is a link, Watson, a tangible thread in the web we're unraveling. But we must act quickly. She's preparing to leave. The woman rose from the table, her veiled hat casting a shadow over her face as she moved toward the door. The broker remained seated, his eyes scanning the room, and Holmes noted the subtle tension in his posture. He's wary, Holmes murmured. He suspects he's being watched. We can't approach him yet, not without more evidence. Watson grabbed Holmes' arm as the woman reached the door. Holmes, she's getting away. We can't let her slip through our fingers. Holmes shook his head, his eyes never leaving the woman's retreating figure. Patience, Watson. Confronting her now would only alert the broker and drive the serpent further underground. We have her handkerchief, her initials, and a connection to the museum. That's enough for tonight. We follow the trail, not the person. The woman disappeared into the fog, her silhouette swallowed by the night. Holmes and Watson lingered in the tavern for a few moments longer, ensuring they weren't followed, before stepping back into the alley. The air was colder now, the fog thicker, and Watson shivered as he pulled his coat tighter. What now, Holmes? He asked, his breath visible in the chill. We've got her initials, but that's hardly enough to track her down in a city this size. Holmes' eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. Oh, we have more than you think, Watson. The handkerchief is monogrammed, yes, but it's also scented with the same lavender oil we traced to the apothecary, and the fabric fine linen, not the sort you'd find in Whitechapel's markets. Our thief, or their accomplice, is someone of means, or at least someone with access to wealth. And then there's the parcel she handed to the broker. Did you notice its shape? Watson shook, his head exasperated. No, Holmes, I didn't. It was too dark, and I was too busy trying not to get knifed. Holmes chuckled softly. A rectangular package, roughly 6 inches by 4, wrapped in brown paper. Too small to be the Emerald Serpent itself, but likely a document or a key related to its transport. We're dealing with a network, Watson, not a lone thief, but a syndicate with layers of deception. They made their way back to Baker Street, the city's pulse fading into the quiet hum of the night. At 2-1 Holmes lit his pipe and settled into his armchair. The handkerchief spread out on the table before him. Watson, still buzzing with the adrenaline of the evening, poured himself a brandy and sank into his own chair. So, what's our next move? Watson asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "We've got initials, a scent, and a vague description of a woman in a veiled hat. It's a start, but it's not much." Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes fixed on the handkerchief. "It's more than you think, Watson. The initials EVR a clue, but the true lead lies in the handkerchief's provenance. I'll send it to my chemist friend, Dr. Hargrove. For analysis, there may be traces of soil or other substances that can narrow down her movements. And the lavender scent ties her to the apothecary, which we'll revisit tomorrow to inquire about regular customers. But most importantly, we now know the broker is real, and he's dealing with a woman who's intimately connected to the theft." Watson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You think she's the thief herself?" Holmes tilted his head, considering. "Possibly, but I suspect she's a pawn in a larger game. The Emerald Serpent is too valuable, too conspicuous, for a single person to manage its theft and sale without support. The broker is the key. He's the one orchestrating the deal, and she's his intermediary. Our task now is to find her, and through her, the broker's true identity." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. Holmes picked up the handkerchief, turning it over in his hands. "There's something else," he said, almost to himself. "The stitching on these initials, it's not machine-made. It's hand-embroidered, with a particular flourish I've seen before. If I'm not mistaken, it's the work of a seamstress in Covent Garden, one who caters to a very specific clientele." Watson raised an eyebrow. "You can tell that from a few stitches." Holmes smiled faintly. "Every trade leaves its mark, Watson. Just as a surgeon's hands betray their skill, so too does a seamstress's needle. Tomorrow we'll pay a visit to Covent Garden and see if we can't trace the owner of this handkerchief. For now, rest. We've a long chase ahead of us." Watson nodded, draining his glass. "Rest, he says," he muttered, half to himself. "As if I could sleep after all this." Holmes didn't respond, his gaze distant, already lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts. The Emerald Serpent was out, there hidden in the fog of London's underworld, and he was determined to drag it back into the light. The next morning, the sun struggled to pierce the city's ever-present haze as Holmes and Watson set out for Covent Garden. The market was a riot of colour and sound, with vendors hawking flowers, fruits, and trinkets from their stalls. Holmes, now dressed in his usual attire but with a scarf pulled high to obscure his face, led the way to a narrow shop tucked behind a row of flower carts. The sign above the door read Madame Lefevre, fine embroidery, and the windows displayed delicate lace and embroidered linens dot inside. The shop was a haven of order amidst the chaos of the market. Shelves lined with bolts of fabric stretched to the ceiling, and a small woman with sharp eyes and nimble fingers looked up from her work as they entered. Madame Lefevre, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, regarded them with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Good morning, Madame," Holmes said, his voice smooth and deferential. "I wonder if you might assist us with a matter of some delicacy." Madame Lefevre set down her needle, her eyes narrowing. "Delicacy, is it? I don't deal in secrets, sir, only stitches." Holmes produced the handkerchief, holding it up to the light. "Then perhaps you can tell me about this. The embroidery, particularly the initials EV, bears your distinctive style. I'd like to know who commissioned it." The seamstress's expression tightened, her fingers twitching, as if itching to reclaim the handkerchief. "I embroider for many clients, sir. I don't keep a ledger of their names." Holmes leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Come now, Madame Lefebvre. A craftsman of your skill doesn't forget her work. This handkerchief was made for someone of means, someone who values discretion. I'm not here to cause trouble, but I will have answers. Madame Lefebvre hesitated, her eyes flicking to Watson, who stood by the door, his hand resting casually near his coat pocket. She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. Very well. The handkerchief was made for a woman who came to me a month ago. She didn't give her name, but she paid in gold sovereigns more than the work was worth. She wanted the initials done quickly, said it was a gift. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Describe her. She was tall, slender, with a refined way of speaking, like someone who'd been educated but didn't want to show it. Wore a veiled hat, dark blue, and a cloak that was too fine for this part of town. I didn't ask questions. She paid, I stitched, and she left. Watson spoke up, unable to contain himself. Did she say anything about where she was going, or why she needed the handkerchief? Madame Lefebvre shook her head. Not a word, but she was in a hurry, kept checking a pocket watch. I got the sense she was meeting someone important. Holmes nodded, tucking the handkerchief back into his pocket. Thank you, madame. You've been most helpful. If she returns, I'd appreciate it if you'd send word to 2-1B Baker Street. The seamstress's eyes widened slightly at the address, but she nodded. I'll keep that in mind, sir. As they left the shop, Watson turned to Holmes, his brow furrowed. That's it. We've got a description that matches half the women in London and no name to go on. Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. Patience, Watson. We've confirmed the handkerchief's origin and the woman's appearance. The veiled hat, the refined speech, the gold sovereigns, they paint a picture. Our thief, or their intermediary, is someone who moves in circles of wealth and secrecy, and the fact that she was in a hurry suggests a timetable. The Emerald Serpent is likely being prepared for transport, possibly abroad. They returned to Baker Street, where Holmes immediately set to work. He spread a map of London across the table, marking the locations they'd visited. The British Museum, the apothecary, the alley where they'd found the cloak, and the Black Anchor. The pieces are coming together, Watson, he said, his finger tracing a line between the points. The lavender scent, the initials, the veiled woman, they all converge on a single figure. But we need more than circumstantial evidence. We need to catch her in the act. Watson sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. And how do you propose we do that? We don't even know her name. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling around him like a halo. We don't need her name, Watson. We need her next move. The parcel she gave the broker likely contains instructions or a key to the Serpent's location. If we can intercept her next meeting, we'll have her and, with any luck, the broker himself. The day passed in a flurry of activity. Holmes dispatched the Baker Street irregulars, his network of street urchins, to keep watch on the apothecary and the Black Anchor. He sent a sample of the handkerchief to Dr. Hargrove for chemical analysis, hoping to identify any trace elements that might pinpoint the woman's movements. And he pored over his files, searching for any mention of a woman with the initials Eve, who might fit the profile of a cunning thief or intermediary. By evening, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Wiggins, the leader of the irregulars. The boy, no more than 12, stood in the doorway, his cap clutched in his hands. Mr. Holmes, we've got something. 1-0 the lad saw a woman in a veiled hat near the Serpentine in Hyde Park. She was talking to a toff in a fancy carriage, and they looked like they was up to no good. Holmes' eyes lit up. Excellent, Wiggins. Did your lad see where they went? Wiggins nodded. The carriage headed toward Kensington. The toff was a tall bloke, looked nervous, like he didn't want to be seen. The woman got in with him, and they drove off. Holmes tossed Wiggins a shilling, his mind already racing. Well done, lad. Keep your eyes peeled and report back if you see her again. As Wiggins scampered off, Watson turned to Holmes, his expression sceptical. The Serpentine, that's a bit public for a clandestine meeting, don't you think? Holmes paced the room, his pipe forgotten in his hand. Precisely why it's perfect, Watson. A public place, crowded with strollers and carriages, offers cover in plain sight. Our woman is clever, she knows how to blend in. And the toff in the carriage could be a buyer, a courier, or even the broker himself. We must act quickly. Tomorrow we'll stake out the Serpentine and see if we can't catch her in the act. Watson sighed, resigning himself to another sleepless night. I suppose I should pack my revolver, then. Holmes clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. Always, Watson, always. The following morning they set out for Hyde Park, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. The Serpentine glimmered under a weak sun, its banks lined with couples strolling arm in arm and vendors selling roasted chestnuts. Holmes and Watson took up a position behind a cluster of trees, their eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of a veiled hat or a familiar carriage. Hours passed, the park growing busier as the day wore on. Watson shifted uncomfortably, his legs cramped from standing still. Holmes, are you sure about this? We could be chasing shadows. Holmes didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. Then, with a sudden intensity, he grabbed Watson's arm. There, Watson, look. The carriage, with the crest of a lion and a serpent. And there she is, the woman in the veiled hat. Watson followed his gaze, spotting the carriage parked near a secluded bend of the lake. The woman, her face obscured, as always, stepped out, a small package clutched in her hand. A man emerged from the carriage, his face pale and his movements jerky. Holmes' eyes narrowed. That's Lord Victor Ellswood, he said softly, a minor noble with a penchant for gambling. I've seen his name in the papers, debts piling up, estates mortgaged to the hilt. He's our link. Before Watson could respond, the woman handed the package to Ellswood, who tucked it into his coat with a nervous glance around. She leaned in, whispering something, then turned to leave. Holmes was already moving, his long strides carrying him toward the carriage with Watson scrambling to keep up. Stop, Holmes called, his voice cutting through the hum of the park. The woman froze, her head snapping toward him. For a moment, their eyes met through the veil, and Holmes saw a flicker of recognition, followed by panic. She bolted, her skirt swirling as she darted toward a waiting hansom cab. After her. Watson, Holmes shouted, breaking into a run. Watson followed, his heart pounding as they weaved through the startled crowd. The woman reached the cab, but Holmes was faster, his hand closing around her wrist just as she climbed inside. Not so fast, madam, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. We have much to discuss. The woman struggled, but Holmes' grip was iron. Watson arrived, panting, his revolver drawn but held low. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said, his voice steady despite his exertion. The woman's shoulders slumped and she ceased struggling. You're Sherlock Holmes, she said, her voice low and cultured, with a hint of an accent Watson couldn't place. "I should have known you'd find me." Holmes raised an eyebrow, releasing her wrist but standing close enough to prevent another escape. "Indeed, and you are." She hesitated, then lifted her veil, revealing a striking face pale, with high cheekbones and eyes that glittered with defiance. "Eliza Vance," she said. "And you're too late, Mr. Holmes. The Emerald Serpent is already gone." Holmes' expression didn't change, but Watson saw the flicker of intensity in his eyes. "Gone, you say? Then perhaps you'll enlighten us as to where and who you're working for." Eliza Vance smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "That, Mr. Holmes, is a conversation for another time." Before Holmes could press further, the hansom cab's driver cracked his whip, and the vehicle lurched forward, carrying Eliza Vance into the chaos of London's streets. Holmes made no move to pursue, his gaze fixed on the retreating cab. Watson stared, incredulous. "Holmes, why didn't you stop her?" Holmes turned, his expression unreadable. "Because, Watson, she's not the prize. The package she gave Ellswood is. And I have a feeling Lord Ellswood will be far more forthcoming than Miss Vance." They turned back to the carriage, where Lord Ellswood stood frozen, his face ashen. Holmes approached, his voice low and dangerous. "Lord Ellswood, I believe you have something that belongs to the British Museum. Shall we discuss it here, or would you prefer the privacy of Scotland Yard?" Ellswood stammered, his hands trembling as he clutched the package. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled, a predator's smile. "Oh, I think you do. And unless you want your name splashed across every newspaper in London, you'll tell me everything starting with why you're dealing with Eliza Vance and the broker." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Holmes and Watson led a shaken Lord Ellswood back to Baker Street. The package, still unopened, lay heavy in Holmes' pocket. A tangible link to the Emerald Serpent and the shadowy figure pulling the strings. Chapter 5. The Coded Message. The fog clung to the streets of London like a persistent spectre, its damp fingers curling round the gaslights that flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness. At 2-1B Baker Street, the air inside was thick, with the scent of tobacco and the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed on the small, crumpled handkerchief that lay on the table before him. The monogram Eve was embroidered in delicate silver thread, a silent testament to the elusive figure they had encountered at the tavern. Beside it, a folded slip of paper, discovered tucked within the handkerchief's folds, bore a series of cryptic symbols that had consumed Holmes' attention for the better part of an hour. Dr. John Watson, seated across from him, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His medical bag rested at his feet, a reminder of the day's earlier distractions. Patient with a persistent cough had delayed his return to Baker Street. Now, as the clock struck 9, he watched Holmes with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. The room was silent, save for the occasional pop of the fire and the faint scratch of Holmes' pencil as he jotted notes on a scrap of paper. "Holmes," Watson ventured at last, "you've been staring at that scrap for an age. Surely it's just a laundry list or some trivial note. Are you certain it's worth all this fuss?" Holmes' lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, though his eyes never left the paper. "My dear Watson, you underestimate the significance of the seemingly trivial. This note is no mere laundry list. It is a cipher, and a devilishly clever one at that. The thief or their associate has gone to considerable lengths to conceal their intentions, but they have made one fatal error. They left it behind. Watson leaned forward, peering at the slip of paper. It was no larger than a calling card, its surface covered in a jumble of letters and numbers arranged in no apparent order. K3M9P7, S2L4R8, V1N6Q5. Below them, a single line read, "By the serpent's coil, at the hour of the moon's ascent." The words were poetic, almost theatrical, but their meaning was opaque. A cipher, you say? Watson frowned. It looks like gibberish to me. And that line about the serpent's coil, what does it mean? A reference to the Emerald Serpent? Perhaps. Precisely, Holmes replied, his voice sharp with focus. The serpent's coil is undoubtedly a nod to the stolen statuette, but the phrase is more than mere flourish. It suggests a location, a time, or both. As for the cipher, it is a substitution code, likely a variant of the Vigenère cipher, but with a numerical twist. The numbers may represent positions or shifts in the alphabet, and the letters are the encoded message. The key, I suspect, lies in the handkerchief itself. Watson raised an eyebrow. The handkerchief? It's just a piece of cloth with initials. Holmes picked up the handkerchief, holding it to the light. Observe, Watson. The embroidery is meticulous, the thread of high-quality silk, not cotton. The initials EV match those on the cloak we found in the alley. This is no coincidence. The owner of this handkerchief is either a thief or a close confederate, and the note was hidden in a fold, stitched shut with a single thread that was deliberately broken. Whoever dropped it meant for it to be found, perhaps by an ally, or perhaps as a misdirection. Watson shook his head, marveling at Holmes' ability to extract meaning from such minutiae. So, what's the next step? Do we hunt for this EV? Not yet, Holmes said, rising abruptly. He crossed to his cluttered desk, where he retrieved a well-worn copy of Deacon's Code and Cipher Compendium. First, we must crack the cipher. The message will tell us where to look next. If my theory is correct, it will lead us to a rendezvous point where the Emerald Serpent is to change hands. Holmes set to work, his pencil flying across the page as he tested various keys against the cipher. Watson watched, fascinated despite himself, as Holmes muttered under his breath, discarding one hypothesis after another. The fire burned low, and the room grew colder, but Holmes seemed oblivious to the passage of time. At last, after nearly an hour, he let out a triumphant exclamation. Got it. Holmes held up the paper, his eyes gleaming. The key is serpent. The numbers indicate the positions of the letters in the Vigenère table, adjusted by a shift of 3 to account for the numerical sequence. The decoded message reads, "Serpentine, midnight, under the willow." Watson's eyes widened. The Serpentine, as in Hyde Park. Indeed, Holmes said, already reaching for his coat. The Serpentine Lake, to be precise. The willow likely refers to one of the ancient trees along its banks, a perfect spot for a clandestine meeting. The hour of the moon's ascent suggests midnight, when the moon is high. We haven't much time, Watson. Fetch your revolver we may. Need it. Watson hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 10. Holmes, are you sure about this? It could be a trap, and who's to say this EV will even be there? A trap is possible, Holmes conceded, buttoning his coat, but the risk is worth the reward. The Emerald Serpent is within our grasp, and I intend to seize it. Come, what's in the game is afoot. The night air was sharp, and biting as Holmes and Watson made their way through the fog-shrouded streets toward Hyde Park. The gaslights cast long, wavering shadows, and the occasional clatter of a hansom cab broke the eerie silence. Watson's revolver, a reassuring weight in his pocket, did little to quell the unease that gnawed at him. Holmes, however, moved with the purposeful stride of a hound on the scent, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of their quarry, Hyde Park was a ghostly expanse under the moonlight, its trees looming like silent sentinels. The serpentine lake shimmered faintly, its surface rippling in the gentle breeze. Holmes led the way to a cluster of willows near the water's edge, their drooping branches forming a natural curtain. He motioned for Watson to stay low, and they crouched behind a thicket, their breath visible in the chilly air. Holmes whispered, pointing to a figure standing beneath the largest willow. The figure was cloaked, their face obscured by a veiled hat, the same woman, Watson realized, whom they had seen at the tavern. She paced nervously, clutching a small package wrapped in cloth. Moments later, a second figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored overcoat. His face was partially illuminated by the moonlight, revealing sharp features and a neatly trimmed moustache. "That's Lord Victor Ellswood," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible. "A minor noble, disgraced after a scandal involving gambling debts. I've crossed paths with him before. He's desperate and dangerous, a perfect pawn for our thief." Watson squinted, trying to make out the details of the exchange. The woman handed the package to Ellswood, who inspected it briefly before tucking it into his coat. Their conversation was hushed, but Holmes' keen ears caught fragments of it. "Must be delivered by dawn," the woman said, her voice low and urgent. "The broker will not tolerate delays." Ellswood nodded, his expression tense. "And my debts? You promised they'll be settled," she snapped. "But only if you do your part." "Now go." Ellswood turned to leave, but the woman hesitated, glancing around as if sensing they were being watched. Holmes pressed himself lower, his hand gripping Watson's arm to keep him still. The woman's gaze lingered on their hiding spot for a moment before she turned and hurried toward a waiting carriage. The vehicle's door bore a distinctive crest-coiled serpent entwined with a rose. Holmes' eyes narrowed. That crest belongs to the Vance family, an old but impoverished line. Our EV is likely Eliza Vance, a name I've heard whispered in theatrical circles. She's no ordinary thief, Watson. She's a master of deception. The carriage rattled away into the fog, and Ellswood disappeared in the opposite direction. Holmes sprang to his feet, his mind racing. "We must follow the carriage," he said. "Ellswood is a pawn, but Eliza Vance is the key. She's working for the broker, and that package may well be the Emerald Serpent." Watson scrambled to keep up as Holmes strode toward the park's entrance, where a hansom cab waited. "Holmes, are you certain? That package could be anything. Decoy, perhaps." "Possible," Holmes admitted, climbing into the cab, "but the risk of losing the trail is too great. To Baker Street, driver, and quickly." Back at 221B, Holmes paced the sitting room, his mind a whirlwind of deductions. The fire had been rekindled, and Watson sat by it, nursing a glass of brandy to steady his nerves. The clock now showed 1:30, and the night's events had left him both exhilarated and exhausted. "Holmes," Watson said, "we saw the package change hands, but we don't know if it was the Emerald Serpent. And this Eliza Vance, is she really a thief? An actress? Both?" Holmes stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Eliza Vance is a woman of many faces, Watson. My sources in the theatrical world describe her as a former actress who vanished from the stage after a scandal of her own. She has a talent for disguise and a mind sharp enough to orchestrate a theft as bold as this one. But she is not the mastermind. The broker pulls the strings, and I suspect he is someone far more dangerous than we've yet realized. Watson frowned, and Ellswood. He seemed frightened, not in control. Exactly, Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. Ellswood is a weak link, coerced into this scheme by his debts. We shall pay him a visit tomorrow and apply the necessary pressure, but for now we must focus on Eliza Vance. The carriage's crest suggests she is operating under her family's name, perhaps to maintain an air of respectability. I've sent word to the Baker Street irregulars to track her movements. By morning, we should know her whereabouts. Watson set down his glass, his mind still reeling, and the cipher. The meeting at the Serpentine, was it just a handover, or something more? Holmes smiled faintly. The cipher was a test, Watson. The thief or the broker wanted to ensure their instructions were followed precisely. The Serpentine meeting was a staging point, not the final destination. The Emerald Serpent is likely en route to a buyer, possibly abroad. We must act swiftly to intercept it. As the firelight cast long shadows across the room, Holmes sank back into his armchair, his mind already turning to the next move. Watson watched him, marveling at the relentless energy that drove his friend. The trail of the Emerald Serpent was growing warmer, but the shadows of deception were deepening, and Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a game far larger than they had anticipated. The night wore on, and Holmes remained silent, his eyes fixed on the handkerchief as if it held the answers to the universe itself. Watson, sensing his friend's need for solitude, retired to his room, leaving Holmes to wrestle with the puzzle. But as he climbed the stairs, he couldn't help but glance back at the detective, a solitary figure in the glow of the fire, chasing the elusive truth through the labyrinth of London's underworld. The next morning dawned grey and dreary, the fog having given way to a persistent drizzle that slicked the cobblestones of Baker Street. Holmes was already up, his violin lying neglected on the table as he pored over a map of London. Watson joined him, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Good morning, Watson," Holmes said without looking up. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Watson replied, peering at the map. "What's this, then? Planning our next move?" "Indeed," Holmes said, tapping a point on the map near Hyde Park. The Serpentine was merely a stepping stone. The carriage we saw last night was headed east, toward Mayfair. I've cross-referenced the Vance family crest with the records at the College of Arms. Eliza Vance resides at a modest address in Whitechapel, but she maintains a facade of wealth through her family's old connections. I suspect she uses her theatrical skills to move unnoticed among London's elite. Watson nodded, impressed despite himself. "And Ellswood, are we visiting him today?" Holmes folded the map with a decisive snap. "We shall call on Lord Ellswood at his estate in Kensington. He is the weak link in this chain, and I intend to break him. But first, we must prepare. Eliza Vance is no fool she have anticipated pursuit. We must be cautious." As they donned their coats and stepped into the rain-soaked street, Watson felt a surge of determination. The Emerald Serpent was out there, hidden in the web of deceit spun by Eliza Vance and the broker. With Holmes leading the way, they would unravel that web, thread by thread, until the truth was laid bare. But in the back of his mind, Watson couldn't shake the image of the veiled woman, her eyes scanning the darkness as if she knew they were coming. The journey to Kensington was uneventful, the cab rattling through streets lined with grand houses and manicured gardens. Lord Ellswood's estate was a stately affair, its facade marred by signs of neglect, peeling paint, overgrown hedges, a testament to the nobleman's financial woes. Holmes and Watson were admitted by a nervous butler who led them to a dimly lit study where Ellswood awaited. Lord Victor Ellswood was a man in his late 30s, his once handsome features now etched with worry. His eyes darted to Holmes and Watson as they entered, and he rose from his chair with a forced smile. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "To what do I owe this visit?" Holmes wasted no time. "Lord Ellswood, let us dispense with pleasantries. You were seen last night at the Serpentine, receiving a package from a woman known as Eliza Vance. That package, I believe, contains the Emerald Serpent, stolen from the British Museum. I suggest you tell us everything you know, or I shall be forced to involve Scotland Yard." Ellswood's face paled, and he sank back into his chair. I don't know what you're talking about. I was nowhere near Hyde Park last night." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Do not insult my intelligence, sir. I observed you myself, and the crest on the carriage matches that of the Vance family. You are entangled in a criminal enterprise, and your only hope is to cooperate." Watson watched. As Ellswood's composure crumbled, the man ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. "You don't understand," he said at last. "I had no choice. My debts, they were crushing me. She promised to clear them if I helped her." "Who is she?" Holmes pressed, his voice like steel. "Eliza Vance," Ellswood admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She came to me a month ago, claiming she could erase my debts if I assisted in a transaction," she said. "It was a simple matter, a relic to be sold to a foreign buyer. I didn't know it was stolen, not at first." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing, and the broker. "What do you know of him?" Ellswood shook his head. "I never met him. Eliza dealt with him directly. She said he was dangerous, someone not to be crossed. All I did was collect the package and deliver it to a contact in Dover. That's all, I swear." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. "Dover," he said softly. "The trail leads to the coast. And the package, where is it now?" "I gave it to a man at the docks," Ellswood said, his voice breaking. "I don't know his name. He had a scar across his left cheek and carried a cane. That's all I know." Holmes stood, his mind already racing ahead. "Thank you, Lord Ellswood. You have been most helpful, but I warn you, do not attempt to flee. Scotland Yard will be watching." As they left the estate, Watson turned to Holmes. "Do you believe him about not knowing the broker?" Holmes nodded. "He's too frightened to lie convincingly. His role was minor, a courier at best. Eliza Vance is the key, and this man with the scar and cane, he may be our link to the broker. We must move quickly, Watson. The Emerald Serpent is slipping away." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Holmes dispatched the Baker Street irregulars to scour the docks for any sign of the scarred man, while he and Watson returned to Baker Street to plan their next move. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with the promise of more to come. Holmes sat at his desk, sketching a timeline of events, his mind piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. "Watson," he said at last, "the cipher, the handkerchief, the meeting at the Serpentine all point to a carefully orchestrated plan. Eliza Vance is no mere thief. She is a performer, playing a role in a larger scheme. The broker is the architect, and I suspect he is someone with a mind as sharp as my own. We are dealing with a formidable adversary." Watson nodded, his thoughts drifting to the veiled woman and the package she had handed to Ellswood and the Emerald Serpent. "Do you think it's already on its way to Dover?" "Almost certainly," Holmes said. "But we have one advantage. The thief does not know we've deciphered the cipher or identified Eliza Vance. If we act swiftly, we can intercept the package before it leaves England. The man with the scar and cane is our next lead. We must find him." As night fell, Holmes received a message from Wiggins, the leader of the irregulars. The scarred man had been spotted boarding the Dover Express, a train bound for the coast. Holmes' eyes lit up with the thrill of the chase. "To the station, Watson," he cried, grabbing his coat. "The game grows ever more intriguing. The Emerald Serpent awaits us, and I intend to claim it." Watson followed, his heart pounding with anticipation. The trail of the Emerald Serpent was leading them deeper into a web of intrigue, and with each step the shadow of the broker loomed larger as they boarded the train to Dover. Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing toward a confrontation that would test Holmes' genius to its limits. Chapter 6. The nobleman's secret. The fog clung to the cobblestone streets of London like a shroud, its damp tendrils curling around the gas lamps that flickered weakly against the encroaching dusk. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in a hansom cab, the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves punctuating the silence between them. The vehicle rattled along the Strand, weaving through the evening bustle of pedestrians and omnibuses, its destination a grand estate in Belgravia, home to Lord Victor L. The air inside the cab was thick with the scent of wet wool and the faint tang of tobacco from Holmes' pipe, which he puffed thoughtfully as he stared out the window. Watson shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. "Holmes, are you certain? This Lord Ellswood is involved. The man's a noble, disgraced or not. It seems a stretch to connect him to a museum theft, even with that handkerchief and the crest on the carriage." Holmes' eyes, sharp and unyielding, flicked toward his companion. "Certainty is a luxury we rarely afford, Watson, but the evidence points to Ellswood. The crest on the carriage a silver stag on a field of azure is unmistakable. It belongs to his family. The coded note from the handkerchief mentioned a meeting with a man of his description, and his financial ruin is no secret in London circles. Desperation breeds strange alliances." Watson nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "Gambling debts, you said, but to stoop to fencing stolen artifacts, that's a far cry from a bad hand at cards." "Men have fallen further for less," Holmes replied, his voice low and measured. "Ellswood's debts are not merely a matter of cards. He's entangled with unsavory lenders, the kind who do not forgive lightly. If he's involved, it's likely under duress. We shall see." The cab slowed as it approached a gate flanked by stone lions, their weathered faces glowering in the dim light. The Ellswood estate loomed beyond, a sprawling Georgian mansion with tall windows that glinted like eyes watching the intruders. The cabman reined in the horse, and Holmes stepped out, his long coat billowing slightly in the evening breeze. Watson followed, adjusting his hat and gripping his cane, a habit born of both necessity and readiness. A butler, stiff and formal in his black livery, greeted them at the door. His eyes narrowed as he took in Holmes' sharp features and Watson's more conventional demeanour. "Lord Ellswood is not expecting visitors," he said. His tone clipped. Holmes produced a card with a flourish, his name printed in crisp black letters: Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective. My associate, Dr. Watson. We have urgent business with his lordship concerning a matter of great importance. I assure you, he will wish to see us. The butler hesitated, his gaze lingering on the card before he nodded curtly. Wait here. He disappeared into the house, leaving Holmes and Watson in the cavernous foyer, its marble floor echoing there. Footsteps. The walls were adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors with disapproval. Watson leaned closer to Holmes. This place feels like a mausoleum. Do you think he'll bolt? Holmes? Lips twitched in a faint smile. If he does, it will only confirm his guilt. But I suspect Lord Ellswood is too proud to run. Men of his station cling to their dignity, even when it's threadbare. The butler returned, his expression unreadable. His lordship will see you in the study. Follow me. They were led through a series of opulent rooms, each more lavish than the last. Though signs of neglect were evident: faded curtains, chipped gilding on the furniture, and a thin layer of dust on the mantelpieces. The study, however, was a different matter. It was a sanctuary of order, with polished mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books and a roaring fire casting a warm glow over the room. Lord Victor Ellswood stood by the fireplace, a glass of brandy in his hand, his posture rigid despite the slight tremor in his fingers. He was a man in his late 40s, tall and lean, with a patrician nose and dark hair streaked with silver. His eyes, a pale blue, were shadowed with fatigue, and his tailored suit, though immaculate, hung slightly loose, as if he had lost weight recently. He regarded Holmes and Watson with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice smooth but edged with tension. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Holmes wasted no time. "Lord Ellswood, we are investigating the theft of the Emerald Serpent from the British Museum. I have reason to believe you are connected to this crime." Ellswood's glass froze halfway to his lips. His face paled, but he recovered quickly, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "That is an outrageous accusation, sir. I am a man of honor, despite what the gossip-mongers say. I have no connection to any theft." Holmes stepped forward, his gaze unyielding. "Then perhaps you can explain why a carriage bearing your family crest was seen near the Serpentine Lake in Hyde Park, where a meeting involving the stolen artifact took place, or why a handkerchief monogrammed with the initials EV was found at the same location, matching a cloak discovered in an alley near the museum." Ellswood's jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to the side, a telltale sign of discomfort. "I know nothing of any carriage or handkerchief. You are mistaken." Holmes moved closer, his voice low and deliberate. "I am rarely mistaken, Lord Ellswood. Your financial troubles are well documented. Your estate is mortgaged to the hilt, and your creditors are circling like vultures. A man in your position might be tempted to engage in unconventional means to settle his debts." Ellswood's composure cracked, his voice rising. "How dare you? I will not stand here and be insulted in my own home. Leave at once." Watson stepped forward, his tone conciliatory. "Lord Ellswood, we mean no disrespect, but a priceless artifact has been stolen, and lives may be at stake. If you know anything, it's in your best interest to tell us." Ellswood's shoulders slumped, and he sank into an armchair, rubbing his temples. The firelight cast long shadows across his face, accentuating the lines of strain. I am not a criminal, he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. But you are correct about my debts. They have overwhelmed me. Holmes remained silent, his eyes fixed on Ellswood, allowing the man's own guilt to unravel him. After a long pause, Ellswood continued, his words halting. A woman approached me some weeks ago. She called herself Eliza Vance. She knew of my financial troubles, knew things she shouldn't have. She threatened to expose me to my creditors, to ruin what little reputation I have left. In exchange for my silence and persistence, she promised to clear my debts. Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. Assistance in what capacity? Ellswood hesitated, his fingers tightening around the armrests. She asked me to arrange a meeting with a buyer, someone interested in rare artifacts. I was to act as an intermediary, nothing more. I didn't know the artifact was stolen until after the meeting at the Serpentine. By then, it was too late. She had me trapped. Watson frowned. Trapped? How? She has evidence, Ellswood said bitterly. Letters, documents, things. I wrote in desperation to my creditors. She threatened to send them to the papers. To make my ruin public, I had no choice. Holmes paced slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. And this meeting at the Serpentine, what transpired? I met her there, as she instructed, Ellswood said. She handed me a package, told me to deliver it to a man who would contact me later. I didn't see the artifact itself, only the package. I swear, I didn't know it was the Emerald Serpent until I read about the theft in the papers the next day. Holmes stopped pacing and turned to face Ellswood, his expression unreadable. And this buyer, who was he? I don't know his name, Ellswood said, his voice trembling. He called himself the broker. He was cold, calculating. He spoke with an accent, German, perhaps, or Austrian. He wore a dark coat and a low-brimmed hat, so I couldn't see his face clearly. He took the package and left. That was the last I saw of him. Holmes' eyes narrowed. And Eliza Vance, where is she now? I don't know, Ellswood said, his voice rising with frustration. She vanished after the meeting. I've had no contact with her since. You must believe me, Mr. Holmes. I am not a thief. I was coerced. Holmes' gaze swept the room. Lingering on a large oil painting above the fireplace, a portrait of a stern-faced woman in a velvet gown, her eyes piercing. He stepped closer, examining the frame with a practiced eye. A fine piece, he murmured almost to himself. Early 18th century, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, it seems out of place. Ellswood stiffened. What do you mean? Holmes ran his fingers along the edge of the frame, his movements deliberate. This painting is slightly askew, and the dust on the frame is disturbed, as if it has been moved recently. Curious, for a room so meticulously kept. Before Ellswood could respond, Holmes pressed a hidden catch on the frame's side. With a soft click, the painting swung outward, revealing a small safe embedded in the wall. Ellswood leaped to his feet, his face ashen. How did you? Holmes raised a hand, silencing him. A man in your position, with secrets to protect, would naturally have a place to conceal them. A safe behind a painting is hardly original, but it is effective. Shall we see what it contains? Ellswood's hands shook as he fumbled for a key in his pocket. There's nothing in there that concerns your case, he said, his voice strained. Just personal papers. Then you have nothing to fear, Holmes replied coolly. Open it. Reluctantly, Ellswood unlocked the safe and swung open the door. Inside were stacks of letters, a ledger, and a small velvet pouch. Holmes reached in, ignoring Ellswood's protests, and opened the pouch. A single emerald, no larger than a pigeon's egg, glinted in the firelight. It was not the Emerald Serpent, but its presence was telling. A curious keepsake for a man who claims no involvement in the theft, Holmes said, holding the gem up to the light. This is Burmese, likely from the same region as the Emerald Serpent. A gift from Miss Vance, perhaps. Ellswood collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. It was a token, he admitted. She gave it to me as assurance of her goodwill. I didn't ask for it. Holmes slipped the emerald back into the pouch and pocketed it, ignoring Ellswood's feeble protest. You have been most forthcoming, Lord Ellswood, though I suspect there is more you have not told us. For your sake, I hope you are not protecting Miss Vance or her associates out of misplaced loyalty. Watson, who had been silent for much of the exchange, spoke up. Holmes, if this broker is the mastermind and Eliza Vance is his agent, where do we go from here? Ellswood's clearly a pawn. Holmes' eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. A pawn, yes, but a useful one. Lord Ellswood, you will continue as if this conversation never occurred. If Miss Vance or the broker contacts you again, you will inform me immediately. Fail to do so, and I will ensure Scotland Yard takes a keen interest in your financial affairs. Ellswood nodded weakly, his spirit broken. I understand. As they left the study, Holmes paused in the doorway, glancing back at the portrait. One last thing, Lord Ellswood. That painting your mother, I presume. Ellswood nodded, his expression puzzled. Yes, why? Holmes smiled faintly. A striking resemblance to the veiled woman described by my informants. Curious, don't you think? With that, he turned and strode out, Watson hurrying to keep pace. The butler escorted them to the door, his face a mask of disapproval. As they stepped back into the fog-laden night, Watson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hansom cab was waiting, its driver hunched against the cold. Well, Holmes, Watson said, as they climbed in, you've got your confirmation. Ellswood's in deep, but he's not the brains of the operation. This Eliza Vance sounds like trouble. Indeed, Holmes replied, lighting his pipe once more. Miss Vance is a woman of considerable cunning, but she is not the puppet master. The broker, his role is far more significant. We must find him, and quickly, before the Emerald Serpent slips beyond our reach. The cab lurched forward, carrying them back into the heart of London. The fog seemed to thicken, as if conspiring to hide the truth from Holmes' relentless pursuit. But Watson knew his friend too well. Fog or no fog, Sherlock Holmes would not rest until the mystery of the Emerald Serpent was solved. The journey back to Baker Street was quiet, each man lost in his thoughts. Watson's mind turned to the emerald. In Holmes' pocket, a small but tantalizing clue. He wondered what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows of this case, and whether they would lead to the elusive thief or to something far more dangerous. As the cab rattled through the darkened streets, Holmes leaned back, his eyes half closed, but Watson knew he was far from idle. The detective's mind was a machine in motion, piecing together the fragments of evidence, the lavender scent, the muddy footprint, the monogrammed handkerchief, the coded note, and now Lord Ellswood's confession. Somewhere in that web of clues lay the truth, and Holmes would not stop until he had unravelled it. Back at 2-1B Baker Street, the fire was low, and Mrs. Hudson had left a tray of tea and biscuits on the table. Holmes sank into his armchair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, while Watson poured the tea. The room was a familiar haven, cluttered with books, chemical apparatus, and the ever-present violin. But tonight it felt charged with anticipation. "Watson," Holmes said at last, breaking the silence, "we are dealing with a conspiracy of some complexity. The Emerald Serpent is not merely a stolen artifact, it is a means to an end. The broker's involvement suggests a larger scheme, one that extends beyond London's borders." Watson set down his teacup, his brow furrowed. "You think this is more than a simple theft?" "I am certain of it," Holmes replied. "The Emerald Serpent's value lies not only in its rarity but in what it represents. Its theft was meticulously planned, and the players involved, Miss Vance, the broker, and perhaps others, are part of a network with resources and ambition. We must tread carefully." Watson nodded, though the weight of the case pressed heavily. "On him and Ellswood, do you trust him to cooperate?" Holmes' lips curved in a wry smile. "Trust is a commodity I rarely trade in, Watson. Lord Ellswood will cooperate because he has no choice. Fear is a powerful motivator, and he fears ruin more than he fears us. For now, he is our eyes and ears, whether he likes it or not." The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Watson leaned back, his mind racing. The case had taken a darker turn, and the spectre of the broker loomed large. Whoever he was no ordinary criminal. Holmes' mention of a German or Austrian accent stirred a memory of past cases, of shadowy figures who operated in the margins of society, their motives as inscrutable as their methods. "Tomorrow," Holmes said, rising abruptly, "we will pursue Miss Vance. Her trail will lead us to the broker, and from there to the Emerald Serpent. But tonight, Watson, we rest. Even the keenest mind requires respite." Watson smiled, though he knew rest was a relative term for Sherlock Holmes. As he retired to his room, the events of the evening replayed in his mind. Ellswood's nervous demeanor, the hidden safe, the emerald that hinted at deeper connections. The case was like a puzzle with missing pieces, but Watson had faith in Holmes' ability to find them. As he drifted toward sleep, the last image in Watson's mind was of the veiled woman, Eliza Vance, her identity as elusive as the fog that cloaked London. Somewhere in the city, she held the key to the mystery and, perhaps to a confrontation that would test even Sherlock Holmes' formidable skills. The night deepened, and London slept, unaware of the game of cat and mouse unfolding in its shadows. For Holmes, the hunt was far from over. The nobleman's secret had been uncovered, but the true mastermind remained at large, and the Emerald Serpent was still lost in the mist. Chapter 7. The woman in the Velfa fog clung to the streets of Whitechapel like a shroud, its damp tendrils curling around the gaslights that flickered weakly against the night. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved swiftly through the narrow alleys, their footsteps muffled by the slick cobblestones. The air was thick with the stench of coal, smoke, and decay, a stark contrast to the refined halls of Lord Ellswood's estate they had left just hours before. Holmes' sharp eyes scanned every shadow, his mind racing through the clues that had led them here. A lavender-scented trail, a monogrammed handkerchief, and a Nami Lisa Vance. Watson, his overcoat pulled tight against the chill, glanced at Holmes, whose lean frame seemed almost to blend with the fog. "Are you certain this is the place, Holmes? Whitechapel's a labyrinth, and this boarding house could be anywhere." Holmes' lips twitched in a faint smile, though his gaze remained fixed ahead. Certainty, Watson, is a luxury we rarely afford in pursuit of truth. But the clues converge here. The lavender oil purchased at the apothecary, the initials EV on the cloak and handkerchief, and Lord Ellswood's reluctant confession all point to Eliza Vance. She is our quarry, and this boarding house is her lair. They turned a corner, and a dilapidated building loomed into view. Its sagging roof and cracked windows spoke of neglect, but a faint light glowed from a second-story window, betraying occupancy. Holmes paused, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to the city itself. "There," he said, pointing to the light, "that is where we shall find her." Watson's hand instinctively went to the revolver in his coat pocket. "And if she's as cunning as you say, she's eluded us thus far. Then we must be cunning in return," Holmes replied, his voice low but resolute. "Come, Watson. Time is our adversary as much as she." They approached the boarding house with caution, avoiding the creaking steps of the front porch. Holmes tested the door, finding it unlocked, and slipped inside, Watson close behind. The interior was as grim as the exterior, peeling wallpaper, a musty odor, and a narrow staircase that groaned under their weight. Voices murmured faintly from above, too indistinct to decipher, but Holmes' eyes gleamed with purpose. At the top of the stairs, a faded sign marked room to be. Holmes pressed his ear to the door, then motioned for Watson to stand ready. With a deft twist of his lockpick, the door clicked open, revealing a dimly lit room cluttered with theatrical prop swigs, costumes, and a vanity table strewn with makeup. In the center stood a woman, her back to them, arranging papers on a small desk. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a veiled hat, and her movements were quick, almost nervous. "Miss Eliza Vance, I presume?" Holmes' voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. The woman froze, her shoulders tensing. Slowly she turned, her face obscured by the veil, though her eyes glinted through the mesh. "And who might you be, bursting into a lady's room uninvited?" Her voice was smooth, with a practiced charm that betrayed her theatrical roots. "Sherlock Holmes," he said, stepping forward. "And this is Dr. John Watson. We are here regarding the theft of the Emerald Serpent from the British Museum." Eliza's posture stiffened further, but her tone remained defiant. "The Emerald Serpent? I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. I'm merely an actress, preparing for my next role." Holmes' gaze swept the room, taking in every detail, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air, a sketch of the Emerald Serpent pinned to a corkboard, and a train ticket to Dover tucked among the papers on her desk. "An actress, indeed," he said, his voice tinged with irony. "And a talented one, to have played so many parts. The veiled woman at the museum, the courier at the Serpentine, and now the innocent tenant of this humble abode. But your props betray you, Miss Vance. That sketch, for instance, is a remarkable the likeness of the stolen artifact." Eliza's eyes narrowed, but she maintained her composure. "You're a clever man, Mr. Holmes, but you've no proof. A drawing is hardly a crime." "Perhaps not," Holmes conceded, moving toward the desk. "But the train ticket to Dover suggests you're planning to leave London in haste. And this," he lifted a small vial of lavender oil from the vanity, holding it to the light, "matches the scent I detected at the museum. A rare blend, purchased only yesterday from an apothecary near the crime scene. Coincidence, Miss Vance, or calculation?" Watson, standing near the door, watched the exchange with growing unease. Holmes, she's cornered. If she's working for this broker, she may know where the serpent is. Eliza's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. The broker, oh, you're chasing shadows now, gentlemen. I work for no one but myself. Holmes leaned closer, his eyes boring into hers through the veil. Then why the coded note in your handkerchief? Why the meeting at the Serpentine with Lord Ellswood? And why does your room contain evidence that ties you directly to the theft? You are no mere bystander, Miss Vance. You are a key player in a scheme orchestrated by someone far more dangerous. Tell me, who is the broker? For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed Eliza's face, though she quickly masked it. You think you can intimidate me? I've faced worse than you in the theatres of Drury Lane. I don't know any broker, and I don't have your precious statuette. Holmes' expression remained impassive, but his voice grew colder. You are protecting someone, Miss Vance, and it will cost you dearly. The broker is no ordinary criminal. He is ruthless, and you are expendable to him. Tell me his name, and I may yet help you. Eliza hesitated, her hands clenching the edge of the desk. The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with tension. Watson's grip on his revolver tightened, sensing the situation could turn volatile. Finally, Elisa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't tell you. If I do, I'm dead. You don't know what he's capable of. Then you leave me no choice, Holmes said, stepping back. Watson, search the room. If Miss Vance will not cooperate, the evidence will speak for her. Watson began rifling through the desk, careful not to disturb the papers more than necessary. He found a bundle of letters, some in cipher, others in plain text, addressed to a Mr. B. One mentioned a green treasure and a ship departing from Dover. Holmes. Look at this, he said, holding up the letters. They confirm she's involved with the smuggling operation. Eliza's composure cracked. You don't understand. I was hired, yes, but I didn't steal the serpent. I was only to deliver it. He forced me into this. If I didn't comply, he'd ruin me. Who? Holmes pressed, his voice like steel. Give me his name. Eliza sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I don't know his true name. He calls himself the broker, but he's more than that. He's everywhere, eyes in every corner of London. He knew things about me, things no one should know. He said if I didn't help him, he'd destroy my life. Holmes' eyes narrowed, his mind piecing together the fragments of her story. And the Emerald Serpent. Where is it now? Eliza shook her head. I don't have it. I was to deliver it to a contact in Dover tomorrow night. That's all I know. Holmes picked up the train ticket, studying it closely. The Dover Express, departing at midnight. A convenient escape route. But you're not the mastermind, Miss Vance. You're a pawn, and a poorly protected one at that. Tell me everything, every detail of your instructions, every meeting, every message. Over the next hour, Eliza recounted her involvement, her words halting but increasingly forthcoming. She had been approached by the broker 3 months prior, lured by promises of wealth and threatened with exposure of her past scandal involving a married nobleman that had ended her acting career. The broker had provided her with the lavender oil, the cloak, and the coded messages, instructing her to act as a courier. She had met Lord Ellswood at the Serpentine to pass a decoy package meant to mislead any pursuers. The real Emerald Serpent, she claimed, was still in London, hidden by the broker until the Dover rendezvous. Holmes listened intently, his mind cataloguing every detail. Watson, meanwhile, continued searching the room, uncovering a small notebook hidden beneath the floorboard. It contained sketches of the museum's layout and notes on its security routines, evidence of meticulous planning. "Holmes, this is damning," Watson said, holding up the notebook. She knew exactly how to bypass the guards. Eliza's eyes widened. "That wasn't mine. He gave it to me, told me to study it. I swear, I didn't plan the theft." Holmes took the notebook, flipping through its pages. "Your protestations are noted, Miss Vance, but they change little. You are complicit, whether by choice or coercion. The question now is whether you will aid us in catching the broker or face the consequences alone." Eliza's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. "What do you want me to do?" "Cooperate," Holmes said simply. "You will board the Dover Express as planned, but under our watch. If the broker is as cunning as you say, he will expect you to follow through. We will be there to ensure he reveals himself." Watson frowned. "Holmes, this is risky. If the broker suspects a trap, he could disappear and will lose the Serpent for good." "A calculated risk, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "The broker believes himself untouchable, but arrogance is a weakness. We will use Miss Vance to draw him out." Eliza looked between them, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. "And if I help you, what happens to me?" Holmes' gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. "Your cooperation will be noted with the authorities. I cannot promise leniency, but I can promise you a chance to escape the broker's shadow. Refuse, and you will face justice alone." The room fell silent, save for the distant clatter of a passing cart. Eliza stared at the floor, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it, but you don't know what you're up against, Mr. Holmes. The broker isn't just a man, he's a force." Holmes' smile was grim. "Then it is a force I shall meet head-on. Pack your things, Miss Vance. We leave for Dover at dawn." As they left the boarding house, the fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the gaslights one by one. Watson glanced at Holmes, whose face was set in determination. "Do you believe her, Holmes? About the broker forcing her hand?" Holmes paused, his cane tapping lightly against the cobblestones. "Her fear is genuine, Watson, but her truth is partial. She knows more than she admits, and her role is not as innocent as she claims. Yet she is our best lead to the broker and to the Emerald Serpent. We must tread carefully, for we are not merely hunting a thief, but a mind as sharp as my own." The night closed around them as they vanished into the fog, the game now fully afoot. Chapter 8. The Dover Express. The early morning mist clung to the platform of Victoria Station like a shroud, the air thick with the acrid scent of coal smoke and the distant temps of the Thames. Sherlock Holmes, clad in a nondescript grey overcoat and a flat cap pulled low over his piercing eyes, moved through the bustling crowd with the precision of a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos. Dr. John Watson followed, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, his face a mixture of determination and unease. The station was a hive of activity porters hauling trunks, vendors hawking newspapers, and travellers hurrying to catch the Dover Express, the train that would carry them to the coast and, for Holmes and Watson, closer to the elusive emerald. Serpent. Holmes had deduced that Eliza Vance, the cunning former actress implicated in the theft, was likely transporting the stolen jade statuette to Dover, where it would be smuggled abroad. The train ticket found in her Whitechapel boarding house coupled with the lavender-scented clues and the initials EV on the discarded cloak and handkerchief, pointed to her as the linchpin in the thief's scheme. Yet Holmes suspected a greater mind at work, a shadowy figure known only as the broker, whose identity remained tantalizingly out of reach. The muddy footprint at the British Museum, too small for an adult male, and the cane marks they'd uncovered, suggested a disguiser hallmark of a mastermind who thrived on deception. "Keep your eyes sharp, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low as they approached the platform where the Dover Express stood, its black locomotive hissing steam-like. A restless dragon. Eliza Vance is no ordinary thief. She's clever, adaptable, and likely not alone. We must assume she's already on the train or watching us. Watson nodded, scanning the crowd. "Do you think she recognizes us?" "We've no idea what. She looks like beyond that veiled hat the urchin described." Holmes' lips twitched in a faint smile. "Disguise is her forte, but it's also mine. If she's on this train, she'll be hiding in plain sight. Look for inconsistencies, gestures too deliberate, accessories too precise, and watch for that lavender scent. It's her signature, whether she intends it or not." They boarded the train, settling into a second-class compartment with worn velvet seats and a window streaked with soot. Holmes had chosen second class deliberately. It was less conspicuous than first class, where Eliza might expect pursuit, and less crowded than third, where observation would be hampered. The compartment was half full, a clergyman reading a Bible, a young woman with a basket of flowers, and an elderly man with a silver-topped cane, his face partially obscured by a broad-brimmed hat. Watson's eyes lingered on the cane, recalling the muddy footprint at the museum. He leaned toward Holmes, whispering, "That man's cane could it be?" Holmes' gaze flicked to the elderly passenger, his expression unreadable. "Possibly. Note the wear on the cane's tip. It's consistent with the mark we found. But patience, Watson. We mustn't act until we're certain." The train lurched forward, its whistle piercing the air as it pulled out of the station. London's grimy rooftops gave way to the patchwork. Fields of Kent, the countryside rolling past in shades of green and grey. Holmes sat with his hands steepled, his eyes half closed, but Watson knew his friend's mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of the case. The lavender scent, the initials EV, the coded note deciphered at 2-1B, Baker Street pointing to a rendezvous at the Serpentine. These were threads in a tapestry Holmes was determined to unravel. As the train rattled along, Watson's thoughts drifted to the stakes of their pursuit. The Emerald Serpent was no mere trinket. It was a relic of an ancient Indian temple, its jade carved with intricate scales and eyes that seemed to pulse with life. Its theft from the British Museum had sparked outrage, not only for its monetary value, estimated at tens of thousands of pounds, but for its cultural significance. Sir Reginald Harrow, the museum's curator, had been apoplectic, his career hanging by a thread. Holmes, however, saw beyond the artifact itself. To him, the theft was a puzzle, a challenge to his intellect, and a window into a larger criminal network. The compartment door slid open, interrupting Watson's reverie. A conductor, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, checked their tickets with a perfunctory nod. As he left, Holmes leaned forward, his voice barely audible. "Did you notice his boots, Watson? Polished, but with traces of red clay. Not London soil, more likely from the Dover cliffs. He's been somewhere he shouldn't." Watson frowned. "You think the conductor's involved?" "Not directly," Holmes replied, but he may be a link. The thief's operation is meticulous. They've planned every step, including lookouts. Keep an eye on him. The journey continued, the train's rhythm lulling the passengers into a quiet stupor. Holmes, however, remained vigilant, his eyes darting to every movement. The elderly man with the cane rose stiffly, excusing himself to the corridor. Holmes followed a moment later, gesturing for Watson to stay. "Observe the others," he whispered. "If Eliza is here, she'll react to my absence." Watson nodded, though he felt a pang of unease. Holmes' habit of plunging into danger without explanation was as infuriating as it was effective. He turned his attention to the remaining passengers. The clergyman was engrossed in his Bible, muttering verses under his breath. The young woman with the flower basket was arranging her wares, her movements delicate but deliberate. Watson's gaze lingered on her hands, slender, with a faint scar on one knuckle. Could she be Eliza Vance, hiding behind a vendor's guise? In the corridor, Holmes shadowed the elderly man, noting his uneven gait and the way he leaned heavily on the cane. The man paused at the end of the carriage, glancing out the window as if checking for pursuers. Holmes slipped into an empty compartment, watching through a crack in the door. The man produced a small notebook, scribbling something with a pencil before tucking it into his coat. Holmes' eyes narrowed. The notebook's cover bore a faint crest, similar to the one he'd seen on the carriage in Hyde Park. The train slowed as it approached a small station, and the elderly man disembarked, his movements surprisingly agile. For his apparent age, Holmes followed, signaling Watson to join him. They stepped onto the platform, the air sharp with the scent of rain-soaked earth. The station was little more than a wooden shelter, surrounded by fields and a cluster of cottages. The elderly man was already moving toward a waiting carriage, his cane tapping the ground. "Quickly, Watson," Holmes said, his voice urgent. "We can't let him slip away." They trailed the carriage on foot, keeping to the hedgerows too. Avoid detection. The path led to a secluded farmhouse, its windows dark except for a single flickering light. Holmes crouched behind a stone wall, motioning for Watson to do the same. "This is no coincidence," he murmured. "That man is either the broker or his agent. The cane, the crest, the notebook, they all point to a coordinated effort." Watson gripped his revolver, his heart pounding. "What's the plan, Holmes?" "We observe," Holmes replied. "If the Emerald Serpent is here, we'll find it. But we must be cautious. The broker is no amateur, and Eliza Vance is still at large." They waited until dusk, the farmhouse's light growing brighter against the fading sky. A figure emerged, a woman, her face obscured by a veiled hat. Watson's breath caught. "That's her, isn't it? Eliza Vance." Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Likely, but we need proof. Follow me." They crept closer. Using the cover of a haystack, the woman met the elderly man near a barn, their voices low but urgent. Holmes strained to hear, catching fragments of their conversation. "The Comte expects delivery by tomorrow. The ship is ready. No mistakes this time." The woman handed the man a small package, and he tucked it into his coat before returning to the farmhouse. Holmes' mind raced. The package could be the Emerald Serpent, but he needed certainty. He signaled Watson to circle around to the barn's rear, where a cracked window offered a view inside. Peering through, they saw crates stacked high, some marked with foreign script. Holmes' eyes narrowed as he spotted a crate with a faint green glow emanating from its seams jade. Catching the lamplight, before they could act, a shout rang out. The elderly man had spotted them, his cane raised like a weapon. Intruders. He bellowed, and the woman, presumably Eliza, bolted toward the carriage. Holmes sprang forward, tackling the man to the ground. The cane clattered away, revealing a hollow compartment inside, from which spilled a map fragment. Watson drew his revolver, keeping the farmhouse door in sight as Holmes restrained the man. "Who are you?" Holmes demanded. "And where is the Emerald Serpent?" The man sneered, his accent faintly foreign. "You're too late, Mr. Holmes. The serpent is beyond your reach." Holmes' eyes flicked to the map fragment, which showed a cove near Dover. "Not yet," he said, binding the man's wrists with his own scarf. "Watson, secure him. We need to catch that carriage." They raced after Elisa, who was already speeding toward the coast. The carriage's crest gleamed in the moonlight, confirming its connection to the Hyde Park rendezvous. Holmes flagged. Down a passing farmer's cart, offering a sovereign for a ride to Dover. The farmer, bemused but greedy, complied, and they pursued the carriage through winding lanes. The sea's salty temps growing stronger at the Dover cliffs. The carriage stopped near a smuggler's path leading to a cove. Holmes and Watson dismounted, moving silently through the shadows. Below, they saw Eliza handing a package to a cloaked figure near a small boat. Holmes' heart sank had the Emerald Serpent already changed hands. But as he watched, he noticed the cloaked figure's posture, the way they moved with calculated precision. It wasn't Eliza's accomplice, it was the broker. Holmes whispered to Watson, "We must act now, before they board that boat. The serpent is in that package." They descended the path, using the rocks for cover. As they neared, Holmes overheard the broker's voice, cold and commanding. "You've done well, Eliza, but your usefulness is at an end." Before Eliza could react, the broker drew a pistol, aiming it at her. Holmes leaped forward, shouting, "Drop the weapon." The broker turned, startled, and fired wildly, the shot echoing off the cliffs. Watson tackled Eliza, shielding her as Holmes grappled with the broker. The package fell, rolling toward the water's edge. In the chaos, the broker broke free, sprinting to the boat and vanishing into the night. Holmes retrieved the package, tearing it open to reveal not the emerald serpent, but a decoy, a cheap imitation carved from green glass. He cursed under his breath. "A ruse," he said, helping Watson restrain Eliza. The broker anticipated pursuit. The real serpent is still out there. Eliza, trembling but defiant, glared at Holmes. "You'll never catch him. He's too clever, even for you." Holmes' eyes gleamed with determination. "We shall see, Miss Vance. We shall see." They returned to the farmhouse, with Eliza in custody, the elderly man revealed to be a hired smuggler secured for questioning. The map fragment pointed to a cove, where the real Emerald Serpent was likely hidden, awaiting transport to France. As dawn broke over Dover, Holmes stood on the cliffs, his mind already racing toward the next step in the chase. "Watson," he said, his voice steady despite the setback. "The game is far from over. The broker has shown his hand, and I intend to call his bluff." Watson nodded, exhaustion mingling with resolve. "To France, then?" Holmes smiled faintly. "To France. The Emerald Serpent awaits." The train journey had been but the prelude to a larger hunt, one that would take Holmes and Watson across the channel, into the heart of a criminal web spun by a mastermind. The Dover Express had carried them closer to their quarry, but the elusive thief and the shadowy broker remained one step ahead. For now. Chapter 9. the smugglers cover the night air clung to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson like a damp shroud as they disembarked from the Dover Express, their boots crunching against the gravel of the platform. The sea was close. Its briny scent mingled with the coal smoke still lingering from the train's departure. Holmes' sharp eyes scanned the darkened station, noting the flicker of a single gas lamp casting long shadows across the wooden planks. The map fragment, clutched tightly in his gloved hand, was their only guide, now a tattered piece of parchment, smudged with ink and stained by salt, that had been left behind by the broker in his hasty escape. It was a clue, a breadcrumb in the labyrinthine trail of the Emerald Serpent, and Holmes was determined to follow it to its end. Watson adjusted his overcoat, his breath visible in the chill. "Holmes, are you certain this map is genuine? It could be a trap, you know." The broker didn't strike me as careless. Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile, his gaze fixed on the fragment. Careless, no, Watson. Desperate, perhaps. The broker's escape was too hurried, his movements too erratic. This map is no ruse, it's a mistake, and a costly one. The smuggler's cove it points to is real, and I wager it's where the Emerald Serpent was hidden before its journey across the channel. The map, though incomplete, bore a crude sketch of Dover's coastline, with a jagged line marking a path to a secluded cove just beyond the cliffs. A single word, scrawled in haste, stood out: Serpent. Holmes had already cross-referenced the map's contours with his mental atlas of England's southern coast, narrowing their destination to a rocky inlet notorious among locals for its smuggling history. The cove was a haven for those who preferred their business conducted under the cover of darkness. Far from the prying eyes of the law, they hired a horse-drawn cart from a sleepy innkeeper, who eyed them with suspicion but accepted Holmes. Generous payment without question. The cart rattled along a winding coastal path, the cliffs looming like silent sentinels under a moonless sky. Watson gripped his revolver, his war-honed instincts alert to every rustle in the underbrush. Holmes, however, sat in meditative silence, his mind dissecting the puzzle before them. The faint scent of lavender, that elusive thread from the museum, lingered in his memory. It was no coincidence. He was certain that the letter they'd found on the train, the one addressed to Comte de Lafayette, had carried the same fragrance. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained incomplete. The cart halted at the edge of a steep descent, where the path gave way to a narrow trail snaking down to the cove. Holmes dismissed the driver with a curt nod, and the two men began their descent, guided only by the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. The trail was treacherous, slick with sea spray and littered with loose stones. Watson muttered under his breath about the folly of chasing shadows in such a place, but Holmes pressed forward, his long coat flapping in the wind at the cove's edge. They crouched behind a cluster of boulders, surveying the scene. The inlet was a natural fortress, its high cliffs shielding it from view. A small wooden jetty extended into the water, where a single boat bobbed gently, its hull weathered by years of illicit voyages. Nearby, a cave mouth yawned in the cliff face, its entrance partially obscured by driftwood and seaweed. Lantern light flickered within, casting eerie shadows that danced across the rocky walls. "Smugglers," Watson whispered, his hand tightening on his revolver. "This place reeks of their trade." Holmes nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Indeed, Watson. But this is no ordinary smuggling operation. The Emerald Serpent is no cask of brandy or bale of silk. Its value lies not only in its material worth, but in its cultural significance. Whoever hides it here is playing a larger game, one orchestrated by the broker. They crept closer, moving with the stealth of men who knew the cost of a misstep. The cave's entrance was unguarded, but Holmes paused, his keen senses detecting the faintest trace of lavender in the air. He knelt, examining the ground. The sand was disturbed, marked by footprints, some fresh, others older. But one set stood out, small, precise, and bearing the same narrow heel as the muddy print from the museum. The thief, or their agent, had been here. Inside the cave, the air was damp and heavy, the walls glistening with moisture. The lantern light came from deeper within, where the cave widened into a natural chamber. Holmes motioned for Watson to stay low, and they advanced, their footsteps muffled by the soft sand. The chamber was a smuggler's treasure trove, crates of contraband, barrels of rum, and stacks of stolen goods were piled haphazardly against the walls. But Holmes' attention was drawn to a small wooden box, tucked behind a stack of crates, its lid slightly ajar. He approached cautiously, his fingers brushing the rough wood. The box was empty. Watson let out a frustrated sigh. "Blasted, Holmes. We're too late. The serpent's gone." Holmes' expression remained unperturbed. "Not gone." Watson moved. "The box is new, its wood unweathered. It was placed here recently, likely within the last day. The Emerald Serpent was here, but it's been spirited away likely to that ship bound for France, as the letter suggested." He examined the box closely, noting a faint residue of green dust on its interior. Jade, he deduced from the statuette's surface. The lavender scent was stronger here, emanating from a folded letter tucked into a crack in the crate. Holmes retrieved it, his eyes scanning the elegant script. It was addressed to Comte de Lafayette, written in French, and bore no signature. The contents were brief but damning. Instructions to receive a green treasure at a Calais auction, with payment to be delivered to an intermediary in Paris. The lavender scent was unmistakable, tying the letter to the museum theft and the elusive woman, Eliza Vance. Watson peered over his shoulder. Lafayette again. This Frenchman seems to be at the heart of it. But why move the serpent so quickly? Why not keep it hidden here longer? Holmes folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. Speed is their ally, Watson. The Emerald Serpent is too valuable, too recognizable. The longer it remains in one place, the greater the risk of discovery. The broker or whoever pulls his strings knows we're close. They're moving it to France to distance it from the theft and secure a buyer before we can intervene. The chamber held other clues, though none as direct. Holmes examined the crates, noting their origins. Some bore the marks of London docks, others from ports as far as Amsterdam and Lisbon. This was no small operation. The cove was a hub for a sophisticated smuggling network, one capable of moving priceless artifacts across borders with ease. Yet the absence of the Emerald Serpent gnawed at him. The trail was still warm, but time was slipping away. As they prepared to leave, Watson's sharp eyes caught a glint in the sand near the cave's entrance. He knelt, brushing away the grains, to reveal a small brass key, its surface etched with a serpent motif. "Holmes, look at this. Could it be related?" Holmes took the key, turning it over in his hand. "Excellent find, Watson. This key is no ordinary trinket. The serpent design matches the statuette's iconography, Indian motif, rarely seen. In England, it likely unlocks something tied to the theft, perhaps a safe or a compartment where the serpent was briefly stored." He pocketed the key, his mind racing. The cove had yielded its secrets, but the Emerald Serpent was already beyond their reach, likely aboard a ship crossing the Channel. The letter's mention of Calais and the Comte de Lafayette was their next lead, but Holmes knew the trail would not be so straightforward. The broker, whoever he was, had proven cunning, and the woman, Eliza Vance, was a wild card. Her role as thief, accomplice, or pawn remained unclear. They emerged from the cave, the sea air sharp against their faces. The boat at the jetty was gone, likely taken by the smuggler who had moved the Serpent. Holmes scanned the horizon, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. "We must make for Calais, Watson," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "The Emerald Serpent is bound for that auction, and we must intercept it before it vanishes into the hands of this Comte de Lafayette." Watson nodded, though his expression was grim. "And the broker? He's still out there, Holmes. If he's as clever as you say, he'll be waiting for us." Holmes' eyes gleamed with determination. "Let him wait, Watson. He's made his first mistake, and I intend to ensure it's his last." The journey to Calais would be fraught with danger, but Holmes was undeterred. The map fragment, the lavender-scented letter, and the serpent-etched key were pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. The Emerald Serpent was more than a stolen artifact. It was a symbol of a larger game, one that stretched from London's underworld to the glittering salons of Paris, and at its heart was a mind as sharp as his own, orchestrating every move with precision. As they climbed back up the cliff path, the wind carried the faint sound of a ship's horn in the distance. Holmes paused, his silhouette stark against the rising dawn. "The game is afoot, Watson," he murmured, "and we are not yet outplayed." The Dover dawn broke cold and grey, painting the cliffs with a muted palette as Holmes and Watson reached the top of the path. The cart was waiting, its driver half asleep, and they wasted no time in setting off for the port. Holmes' mind was a whirlwind of deductions, each clue a thread in the tapestry of the theft. The lavender scent, the serpent key, the letter to Lafayette all pointed to a conspiracy that extended beyond a single thief. Eliza Vance was a key figure, but her motives remained opaque. Was she the mastermind, or merely a pawn in the broker's game? And the broker himself, his identity was still a shadow, but his actions bore the mark of a calculating intellect at the port. Holmes secured passage on the next steamer to Calais, a sturdy vessel named the Star of Kent. The docks were alive with activity, fishermen hauling their morning catch, and merchants haggling over crates of goods. Holmes' sharp eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of their quarry. The broker had escaped the train, but his presence lingered in the clues he'd left behind. The serpent key, in particular, intrigued Holmes. Its craftsmanship suggested it was no ordinary lockpicks. It was bespoke, created for a specific purpose. He suspected it would unlock more than a physical barrier. It might reveal the next stage of the thief's plan. Aboard the Star of Kent, Holmes and Watson took a quiet corner of the deck where the sea spray kept most passengers at bay. Watson, ever practical, checked his revolver and adjusted his hat against the wind. "Holmes, suppose we do find the Emerald Serpent in Calais, what then? This Comte de Lafayette sounds like a man with influence. We can't simply barge in and demand the statuette." Holmes leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the churning waves. "Influence can be countered, Watson. The Comte is a collector, not a criminal mastermind. He's likely unaware of the statuette's stolen nature, or at least, he's willing to overlook it for the right price. Our task is to disrupt the transaction before it's complete. Eliza Vance is the key. She's carrying the serpent, I'm certain of it. If we can intercept her, we can recover the artifact and expose the broker's network. Watson frowned. And if she's working for the broker, she's slippery, Holmes. We've seen how icily she evades us. Holmes' smile was thin, but confident. Slippery, yes, but not invisible. Her lavender scent, her monogrammed handkerchief, her veiled hat, these are not the marks of a careful criminal. She wants to be noticed, Watson, even if she doesn't realize it. That vanity will be her undoing. The crossing to Calais was swift, the steamer cutting through the Channel's choppy waters with practiced ease. Holmes spent the journey in silence, his mind mapping out the possibilities. The auction mentioned in the letter was their target, but infiltrating it would require finesse. The Comte de Lafayette was a known figure in French high society, his auctions frequented by the wealthy and unscrupulous. Holmes would need a disguise, a cover story, and a plan to outmaneuver both Eliza and the broker. The serpent key weighed heavily in his pocket, a reminder that every clue was a step closer to the truth. As the French coast came into view, Watson broke the silence. Holmes, this cove, the letter, the key tits, all too convenient, don't you think? What if the broker wanted us to find these things? What if we're being led into a trap? Holmes' eyes flickered with amusement. A possibility, Watson, but an unlikely one. The broker's mistake on the train was genuine. His haste betrayed him. The map fragment was not meant for our eyes, nor was the key. As for the letter, it was hidden, not planted. No, Watson. We're not being led, we're pursuing. And in Calais we shall close the net. The steamer docked at Calais in the late morning, the port bustling with activity. Holmes and Watson disembarked, blending into the crowd of travellers and traders. The air was thick with the scent of fish and tar, and the cries of gulls overhead, mingled with the shouts of dock workers. Holmes' first task was to locate the auction, which the letter had described as a private affair hosted at the Comte's chateau. A quick inquiry at a local tavern confirmed the location. A grand estate just outside the city, known for its opulent gatherings and questionable clientele. Holmes secured a carriage, and they set off for the chateau, the serpent key still in his possession. The countryside rolled past, its fields dotted with wildflowers and grazing sheep, but Holmes' mind was elsewhere. The Emerald Serpent was within reach, but so was the broker. The game was growing more dangerous, and Holmes knew that their next move would determine whether they reclaimed the statuette or fell into the hands of a master criminal. The chateau loomed ahead, its spires piercing the sky like the fangs of some great beast. Holmes adjusted his coat, his mind already crafting the persona of a wealthy art dealer role he would play to perfection. Watson, ever the loyal companion, steeled himself for what lay ahead, his revolver a comforting weight at his side. The cove had been a dead end, but Calais was their chance to turn the tide. The Emerald Serpent was close, and Holmes would not let it slip away again. The chateau's gates were wrought iron, adorned with gilded flourishes that spoke of old wealth and older secrets. A liveried servant checked their forged invitation, had prepared them on the steamer, his penmanship flawless, and ushered them into the courtyard. The auction was already underway, the hum of voices and clink of champagne glasses drifting from the grand hall. Holmes adopted the swagger of a seasoned collector, his accent a flawless blend of Parisian and London tones. Watson, less comfortable in deception, followed closely, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of Eliza Vance or the mysterious broker. The hall was a spectacle of opulence, its walls lined with tapestries and its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. Men in tailcoats and women in silk gowns mingled, their conversations a blend of art, money, and power. Holmes' gaze darted from face to face, searching for the telltale veiled hat or the lavender scent that had become his quarry's signature. He spotted her almost immediately. Eliza Vance, standing near a marble statue, her face partially obscured by a black veil. She was speaking to a tall, impeccably dressed man with a silver canther, Comte de Lafayette himself. Holmes leaned toward Watson, his voice barely a whisper. "There she is, Watson, and with the Comte, no less. We must act quickly, but with care. The serpent is likely in that case she's carrying." Watson nodded, his hand inching toward his revolver. "What's the plan, Holmes? We can't just snatch it in front of all these people." Holmes' eyes gleamed with mischief. "We won't snatch it, Watson. We'll discredit it. Follow my lead." He approached the Comte and Eliza, his demeanor that of a confident bidder. "Monsieur le Comte," he said, bowing slightly, "I hear you have acquired a most intriguing piece of green serpent, perhaps. Though I must warn you, there are rumors it carries a curse." The Comte's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "A curse, monsieur? Surely you jest." Holmes shook his head, his expression grave. "Not at all. I've heard tales from India misfortune follows those who possess it. A collector in Bombay lost his fortune within a month of acquiring it. Surely you've heard similar stories." Eliza's posture stiffened, her gloved hand tightening on her case. Holmes noted the reaction, filing it away. The Comte, however, laughed, though it was a nervous sound. "Superstition, monsieur. The piece is exquisite, nothing more. Perhaps you'd care to bid on it." Holmes smiled, sensing the opportunity. "Perhaps, but I'd need to inspect it first. May I?" The Comte hesitated, glancing at Eliza. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, but Holmes caught the gesture. Before the Comte could respond, Eliza excused herself, slipping through the crowd toward a side exit. Holmes signaled to Watson, and they followed, weaving through the guests with practiced ease. Outside, the night was cool, the chateau's gardens bathed in moonlight. Eliza's figure was a shadow moving toward a waiting carriage. Holmes quickened his pace, his mind racing. The serpent key, the lavender letter, the veiled woman, it was all converging. But the broker was still out there, and Holmes knew that Eliza's flight was no accident. She was running from him, from the Comte, or from something far more dangerous. The carriage door slammed shut, and the horses surged forward. Holmes cursed under his breath, but his eyes caught the crest on the carriage's side. Serpent coiled around a staff. It matched the key in his pocket. "Watson," he said, his voice sharp, "we're not done yet. That carriage is bound for Paris, and so are we. The Emerald Serpent is still within our grasp." As the carriage vanished into the night, Holmes felt the weight of the chase settle over him. The Cove had been a stepping stone, Calais a battleground. Paris would be the endgame, and he was ready to face whatever or whoever waited them there. Chapter 10. Across the Channel. The salt-tinged air of Calais stung Sherlock Holmes' nostrils as he and Dr. John Watson disembarked from the cross-channel steamer, their boots clattering on the weathered dock. The sky hung low, a quilt of grey, clouds promising rain, and the port bustled with the chaotic rhythm of merchants, sailors, and travellers. Holmes adjusted his scarf, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of Eliza Vance or the elusive Emerald Serpent. Their pursuit of the stolen jade statuette had led them here, to a high society auction hosted by the enigmatic Comte de Lafayette, where they suspected the artifact would change hands. Watson, carrying their modest luggage, glanced at Holmes, with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. This place feels like a labyrinth, Holmes. How do you propose we find Eliza in this chaos? Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. Chaos, Watson, is merely a pattern waiting to be deciphered. Eliza Vance is no ordinary thief. She's cunning, theatrical, and drawn to the spotlight. She'll be where the wealthy gather, where her charm can work its magic. The Comte's auction is our stage. They navigated the cobbled streets of Calais, blending into the throng of vendors hawking fish and wine. Holmes had acquired forged invitations to the auction, presenting them as art dealers from London arus that suited their need for discretion. Their aliases, Mr. Sheridan Locke and Dr. James Harrow, were crafted to appeal to the Comte's vanity. A man rumoured to revel in rare treasures and the company of those who appreciated them. The Comte's chateau loomed on a hill overlooking the town, its spires piercing the mist like the teeth of some ancient beast. As they approached, the iron gates swung open, revealing a courtyard lined with carriages and liveried servants. The auction was a spectacle, drawing collectors from across Europe, their wealth evident in the gleam of silk top hats and the flash of jewelled canes. Holmes and Watson, clad in borrowed finery, slipped into the crowd, their forged invitations passing scrutiny with a nod from a deer-faced butler. Inside, the chateau's grand hall was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light across gilded walls, and long tables groaned under the weight of silver trays laden with delicacies. Guests murmured in French, German, and English, their voices a tapestry of greed and anticipation. Holmes' gaze darted from face to face, searching for the veiled woman who had eluded them in London. Watson, less accustomed to such settings, clutched a glass of champagne, his discomfort palpable. "Relax, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low. "You're a dealer with a fortune to spend. Act the part," Watson grunted. "Easier said than done when I'm surrounded by vultures, eyeing their next prize. Do you think Eliza's already here?" "She's here," Holmes said with certainty. "Her lavender scent lingers in my memory, and her flair for drama will draw her to the center of this circus. Keep your eyes on the women, especially those who seem too composed." They mingled, Holmes engaging in clipped conversations about Renaissance paintings and Ming vases, his knowledge disarming even the most skeptical collectors. Watson, playing the gruff but wealthy physician, nodded along, his attention split between the crowd and the auctioneer's podium, where a table displayed the evening's lots. The Emerald Serpent was not among them, but Holmes had expected as much. A prize of its caliber would be reserved for a private transaction, away from prying eyes. As the auction began, the room buzzed with bids for a Venetian mirror and a set of ivory carvings. Holmes' attention drifted to a woman in a sapphire gown, her face half hidden by a lace fan. She stood near the Comte, a tall man with a hawkish nose and eyes that gleamed with avarice. The woman's movements were deliberate, her posture regal, but something in her glance, flicker of calculation, caught Holmes' notice. "There," he whispered to Watson, "that's her, Eliza Vance." Watson squinted. "Are you sure?" "She's not wearing a veil." "She doesn't need one here," Holmes replied. "The fan is her shield, and the gown is her costume. Watch how she lingers near the Comte, never straying too far." She's negotiating. The auction progressed, the crowd's fervor growing with each lot. Holmes and Watson edged closer to Eliza, careful not to draw attention. The Comte, resplendent in a tailored coat, leaned toward her, his voice a low murmur. Holmes strained to hear, catching fragments of French. Tressa, unique and serpent vert. His pulse quickened. The Emerald Serpent was indeed the prize. Holmes needed a plan to disrupt the transaction without exposing their presence. An idea sparked, born of his understanding of human nature and the superstitions that clung to artifacts like the serpent. He excused himself from Watson and approached a cluster of collectors, adopting the air of a seasoned dealer with a scandal to share. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach nearby ears, "have you heard the whispers about the Emerald Serpent? They say it's cursed, you know. Stolen from an Indian temple. Its theft angered the gods. Every owner since has met misfortune, bankruptcy, illness, even death." The collectors exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs rippling through the crowd. Holmes noted Eliza's reaction, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, her fan pausing mid. The Comte's expression darkened, his hand tightening on his cane. Holmes pressed on, weaving a tale of spectral vengeance and ancient rites, each word calculated to sow doubt. Watson, catching on, joined the charade. "I heard the last man who held it lost his entire fortune in a week," he said loudly, drawing gasps from nearby guests. "A pity, really. Such a beautiful piece." The room's atmosphere shifted, the excitement of the auction tinged with apprehension. Eliza's eyes darted to the Comte, who now seemed less certain, his fingers drumming on the table. Holmes knew the window was now. Eliza would act quickly to salvage the deal or flee with the statuette. As the auction paused for a break, Eliza slipped toward a side door, her fan discarded on a chair. Holmes signaled Watson, and they followed, weaving through the crowd. The door led to a dimly lit corridor, its walls lined with tapestries depicting scenes of conquest. Eliza's footsteps echoed ahead, quick and purposeful. Holmes' mind raced, piecing together her likely escape route: a private carriage, a hidden dock, perhaps a boat waiting to spirit the serpent away. They emerged into a courtyard, where a carriage stood ready, its driver cloaked in shadow. Eliza was already climbing inside, a small case clutched in her hand. Holmes sprinted forward, Watson close behind, but the driver cracked the reins, and the carriage lurched into motion. Holmes caught a glimpse of the crest on the Dora serpent, coiled around a dagger before it vanished into the night. "Blast it!" Watson panted, slowing to a stop. "She's gone again." "Not entirely," Holmes said, his eyes fixed on the ground where the carriage had stood. He knelt, examining a faint smear of mud on the cobblestones. "This soil is unique to the cliffs near Calais northern docks. She's headed there, Watson, likely to meet a ship. We're not done yet." They hailed a cab, urging the driver to race toward the docks. The rain had begun, a light drizzle that slicked the streets and blurred the gaslights. Holmes' mind churned, mapping the terrain ahead. The northern docks were a smuggler's haven, a maze of warehouses and hidden piers. If Eliza reached a ship, the Emerald Serpent could be lost forever. The cab rattled to a stop near the waterfront, where the air reeked of fish and tar. Holmes and Watson dismounted, their eyes scanning the shadows. A fog had settled, cloaking the docks in a spectral haze. Holmes' senses sharpened, attuned to every sound, the creak of a ship's hull, the lap of waves, the distant clatter of boots. "There," Watson whispered, pointing to a figure moving toward a pier. It was Eliza, her sapphire gown now covered by a dark cloak. She carried the case, her pace hurried but cautious. Holmes motioned for silence, and they crept forward, using the cover of crates and barrels. Eliza reached a small boat moored at the pier's end, where a man waited, his face obscured by a hat. Holmes recognized the posture, the same calculated calm he'd seen in the tavern where the broker had been mentioned. This was no ordinary smuggler. This was someone with power, someone orchestrating the theft from the shadows. Holmes whispered to Watson, "We need to act now, before she hands over the serpent. Stay close, but don't engage unless I signal." They edged closer, the fog their ally. Eliza and the man exchanged words, too low to hear, but the case changed hands. Holmes' heart sank. If the serpent was gone, their chase might end here. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the mist like a blade. "Miss Vance," he called, "I suggest you reconsider your transaction. The Emerald Serpent is more trouble than it's worth." Eliza froze, her eyes wide with shock. The man spun, his hand dipping into his coat, but Holmes was faster, his walking stick raised in warning. "I wouldn't," he said coolly. "My associate is an excellent shot, and the fog hides more than you know." Watson, catching the bluff, raised his cane as if it were a pistol, his face stern. The man hesitated, then bolted, disappearing into the fog. Eliza, clutching the case, backed toward the boat, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. "You can't stop this, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steady despite her predicament. "The serpent's already sold. You're too late, am I?" Holmes said, stepping closer. The Comte's hesitation suggests otherwise. "My little tale of curses has made him wary. Hand over the statuette, and we can discuss terms." Eliza's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think I'm afraid of your stories. I know who you are, Holmes. But you don't know who's behind this. You're chasing shadows." "Then enlighten me," Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. "Who is the broker?" Her eyes flickered, a momentary crack in her composure. Before she could answer, a shout echoed from the docksmen's voices, rough and urgent. The man who had fled had returned with reinforcements, their silhouettes looming in the fog. Holmes cursed under his breath. They were outnumbered, and time was running out. "Watson, the case." Holmes barked, lunging forward. Watson dove for Eliza, who shrieked and stumbled, the case slipping from her grasp. It hit the pier with a thud, and Holmes scooped it up, his fingers prying it open. Inside, nestled in velvet, was the Emerald Serpent, its jade eyes glinting in the dim light. "Run," Holmes shouted as the men closed in. He and Watson sprinted back toward the docks, the case tucked under Holmes' arm. Shots rang out, splintering wood and pinging off metal. The fog was both curse and savior, obscuring their path but hiding their pursuers. They reached the main road, where their cab waited, its driver startled but obedient. "To Calais station, now," Holmes ordered, shoving Watson inside. The carriage lurched forward, the shouts of their pursuers fading into the night. Inside the cab, Watson panted, his face flushed. "Did we get it? Is it really the serpent?" Holmes opened the case again, examining the statuette. Its craftsmanship was unmistakably intricate scales, a coiled body, and eyes that seemed to pulse with life. "It's genuine," he said. "But this isn't the end. Eliza's words confirm what I suspected. The broker is the true mastermind, and he's still out there. Watson frowned. She mentioned shadows. Do you think she knows who he is? She knows enough to fear him, Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. And that fear will be our leverage. We head to Paris next. Eliza will run there, and where she goes, the broker won't be far behind. The cab rattled through the rain-soaked streets, carrying them toward the station and the next leg of their chase. The Emerald Serpent, safe for now, was a small victory. In a larger game, one that Holmes knew would test his intellect against a mind as sharp as his own. The fog of Calais lingered in his thoughts, a reminder that the truth was still obscured, waiting for his keen eye to pierce its veil. As they boarded the train to Paris, Holmes leaned back in his seat, the case resting on his lap. Watson, ever. The faithful chronicler pulled out his notebook, jotting down the night's events. This is one for the ages, Holmes, he said. A chase across the channel, a cursed artifact, and a villain we can't yet name. Holmes' eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. The game is afoot, Watson, and in Paris we shall see just how deep this web of shadows runs. The train's whistle pierced the night, and the wheels began to turn, carrying them toward the next act in their relentless pursuit of the elusive thief and the mastermind behind her.